Yeah, we're live. Hi, guys.
Hey, mate, it's time to go home. I can't.
Don't get stuck in pain. Voltaren gel penetrates deep into the skin to reduce inflammation and relieve pain to get you moving sooner. Voltaren, the joy of movement.
Get into the good guys with the biggest free bonus. Bonus $350 e-gift card on this Hisense TV. Bonus $250 e-gift card on this LG TV. Plus bonus $250 e-gift card on this TCL TV. Biggest free bonus.
Hey, Diane. Good to see you.
And for you, we are going to be here talking.
I'm trying to mix it up and find interesting stuff so people stay and watch, Di, but it's hard to find decent content.
About a very interesting topic, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Scene Calendar, what's coming up in 2025 and 26. You are not going to want to miss it. Before we go to these esteemed gentlemen, I want to remind everybody about our upcoming Colorado conference, which is going to be June 27th through the 29th in Colorado Springs. You can go to prophecywatchers.com and get all the information that you need there. Also want to remind you that if you can't join us in beautiful Colorado, that we are going to be live streaming the event. Again, you can get information there. We have a couple other events I'll remind you about. I will be going to Greece on a Eastern Mediterranean cruise with Billy Crone and Tom Hughes and a few others. And we're going to do some prophecy talks and lectures on the ship, as well as seeing Athens. And
hey, Shawnee, good to see you.
Basically a missionary tour of where Paul went. So if you want information about that, that is going to be in October. Again, prophecywatchers.com. If you go to the events tab and just scroll down, you'll see places where you can find information to get about that special trip. It'll be fun. And one last thing, we are gearing up as well for a prophecy conference in Branson, Missouri. It's going to be a great time, and you can find information on our website as well. So lots of things going on. As we know, the world is changing very fast, and prophecy conferences are a great way to stay not only informed, but also to hang out with others. I mean, it really, that is one of the goals, is to fellowship with others who are like-minded. And thinking of like-minded, gentlemen, both of you are welcome.
Thank you. How you doing?
This is new stuff. It's only 8 hours old.
I took a class on Qumran in seminary, and so I've always loved the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so to sit here with you guys is great to talk about some of these things. And I think for our audience, maybe Josh, why don't you start with you for a second. Help our audience. Let's say they don't know anything about you.
Mm-hmm.
What have you done, and what have you written about the Dead Sea Scrolls and Qumran? And then I'll ask you the same thing.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I've been studying it not as long as Dr. Ken Johnson has, but he was actually the one that really got me into the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so I wrote my first book about it, which was Lost Prophecies of Qumran, and I started writing that in 2020. And now I just got the final draft done. I'm working on an updated and expanded version called Forgotten Prophecies of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And that one, it gets a lot more in depth with some of the amazing prophecies and also the history of the scenes, who were the writers and keepers of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Not every is.
Shawnee, post the link and I'll place that in between the two videos I'm playing today.
Scene had anything to do with the writing. That was some of the scribes, but it gets into all that history. Gets into prophecies that they had during their time, which they called the Age of Torah, and our time, which they actually called the Age of Grace, which is really phenomenal stuff. So I think people are going to get a lot out of it.
Awesome. And Dr. Ken here, you've written certainly a lot about it. And what kind of got you into this? And then, of course, you kind of, I wouldn't call it a hobby. It's been your joy. Talk about what got you into it, and also kind of the breadth of what you've written.
Well, I started when I became a Christian in my teenage years, and then I realized after going to different churches that they taught different things, different denominations. So I got to the point where I looked up the early church fathers to find out what they taught about all the different things we disagree with, just for my own peace of mind, to find out what was proper doctrine. And in the process of doing that, they talked about Enoch and scrolls and several things like that. Then I got recently the ability to go look at the entire collection of Dead Sea Scrolls and look at them, translate them, see what I thought, compare them from a Christian standpoint, and found out that they have a lot of extra biblical commentaries, prophecies, mainly about the first coming. like completely accurate. And then there's things about the second coming. So I just wanted to pull them all together because I've always been fascinated with prophecy also.
Okay.
So that's why I do what I do.
Mm-hmm. You know, when you think about the Dead Sea Scrolls,
Yeah, thanks, Di. I'll play that in between the videos I've got lined up. Yeehaw.
you know, originally began to be discovered in 1947, or, you know, right around the establishment of the state of Israel. Maybe let's talk about that. We know that, at least in the New Testament, we have the Pharisees, we have the Sadducees, we have the Herodians, we have the Zealots. You have these different political parties, and the New Testament does not mention this group known as the Essenes. And so, where do we, Josh? Tell us kind of, and kind of go back and forth here. This will just be fun. Where do we learn about the Essenes at all? If you know, not from the New Testament, where do we hear about them?
Yeah, one of the first mentions that we get, if not the first mention, is in Josephus. And Essene is just a word that means healer. So we don't see that in the New Testament, but we see it in extra biblical works like Josephus and lots of other places. They're actually written about quite extensively, like in Hippolytus. Which actually, in my new book, I do include all of that as appendices. There's 8 appendices in the new book with all these ancient church fathers that talked about the Essenes and ancient historians and stuff. And like, now that's a good question though. Like in the New Testament, do you see a correlation, Ken, between like if there was a group mentioned, who would be?
Okay, Shawnee. Good night for when you go. Love you, kids.
Essenes be? Would that be the scribes, or who do you think?
The scribes were a different group.
Mm-hmm.
But generally, they were referred to as just the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing about that is when you actually go back and pull it all together, there are several Essenes in Scripture.
Yeah.
According to the church fathers and the Dead Sea Scrolls both. Simeon, who sacrificed, or not sacrificed, but circumcised our Lord, apparently was a teacher of the school of the prophets, and therefore an Essene. They kept that whole order. Another one is when Paul and Barnabas were anointed to go forth. It said the Holy Spirit wanted them to go forth on missionary trips, and it said that 3 prophets came down from Antioch, and it names them. One of them was Miraculous in Greek. And we have his whole history of him.
No, Shawnee, not Russian, yeah.
With the Essene order and actually leading the Sanhedrin because of becoming a believer. It's really fascinating to see that whole thing, all the history behind it.
Was that the same individual that had that prophecy about Herod?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's him.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that. Don't leave the audience out. What prophecy of Herod? Talk about.
Yeah. So there was an Essene named Menachem that had when Herod was basically a kid. You know, he was a lot younger.
We're talking about Herod the Great here.
Yeah. He had this prophecy that he would be a great king, but then eventually become corrupt. Well, when Herod actually became king, he brought Menachem, to him and said, like, okay, well, what now? And like, how long is my reign going to last and all that? And he told him.
Diane, do you remember Mike from Around the World said there's a super volcano under Italy, and when it blows, that's Italy gone? I remember he said that.
And that was one of the amazing things about the Essenes is that they're recorded as having 100% perfect prophecy, and that's just one small example. But yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, and when you read in Acts, it talks about how this is Menachem or Menachem, the one that was in Herod's household. So just to let you know, we're talking about the same guy. Fascinating part about that is it's not even really that hard. They're known to be prophets, but if you know the prophecies about the one that betrays the Christ is an Edomian. And then you're looking at Rome going, we tried Pharisees, that didn't work. We tried Sadducees, that didn't work. We're going back and forth. And so the next logical place might be one of these 5 guys. One's an Edomian. Well, that's him. I mean, it's pretty obvious. You can go back through and look at all these things and see how you can just figure it out almost after the prophecies are given. It's fascinating.
So, and we know that the Josephus mentions that the Essenes were not just out in the desert. You know,
right.
They
were all over.
They were all over the place, and so I think he lists they're numbered in the thousands. And so let's talk about that. We know as well, you know, the first century, 100 BC. We see even before that the Maccabean revolt, and so then we see all of the Hasmonean dynasty, and that connection that happens in this 100 years, you know, basically 100 BC down to 0, if you want to say it that way. But let's talk about the time frame. The Essenes, in the sense of what do we know as it relates to their origination and their time frame and their extensive, even maybe a little bit of a history, how they rebelled against the Jerusalem, group. Talk about that.
Go for it.
Basically, their story is that Jews were Jews. And when we came back with Ezra, everybody believed in a Messiah, him dying for our sins. It's just basic 101 Judaism. Then cults rose up for different reasons and became known as Pharisees and Sadducees. Somehow the cults took over the government and then ousted them. There was even these targeted assassinations, and they had to go to Egypt for a while until the Daniel prophecy about Rome stepping in and creating a peace. And at that point, they were supposed to go back into Israel and prepare the way of the Messiah. So it was all set in their mind what they should do. So if you look at it like that, Judaism is the same as Christianity, it has the same doctrine. And when they don't, because it's Pharisees and Sadducees, it's basically because a cult rose up. It kind of took everything over. So their basic idea is that stuff started around the 200s BC and kind of came in waves. And then
it's like the Sunni and Shia in Islam, two different disciplines.
The dispersion and the comeback. And there's a whole lot of history that they give. They say that there's actually a book with everybody's genealogies and the events in Shemitahs and Jubilees throughout all of time that they have. So it's fascinating.
Yeah, and one of the major things that caused the split was the issue with the calendar. So probably around the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, fourth, maybe fifth, but probably the fourth. They came in and they said, okay, well, basically we'll let you do some of your Jewish stuff, but you have to adopt our lunar calendar, because before that they had a solar one, the one that they said that God gave to them. And there was a big split there. So the people that would become the Essenes said that they weren't going to do that, so they left. And then the ones that stayed and said, okay, we'll change our calendar, they changed to this pagan lunar calendar.
So the Greeks, you're saying that the Greeks were imposing on them a lunar calendar?
Yeah. Yep. And it's interesting because you can look at the history of the Seleucid Empire, and they have a calendar that's basically the same as the lunar calendar that they ended up adopting. So you can kind of pinpoint where this was. But according to the Essenes, that was a major sin, because there were certain rituals that had to be done on specific days. And if you don't have the proper calendar, you're going to miss the days. And we know with some of those things, if you do them wrong, you can lose your life. And what's really interesting is there's actual records where it was like before that time, out of all of history, there was maybe 18 priests or something like that have ever died. But then after that happened, it jumped up to like 300 that died because they were doing these rituals and things on the wrong days. They were doing them wrong. So that was one of the main things that caused this big division. But what's amazing is that original solar calendar was perfect, and it fits with the Bible. So when we get day counts, like prophetic day counts with the two witnesses, or even things where it says, when the third day of the month this happened, well, it's mentioning it for a specific reason. And now that we know what that calendar is, and now that we have that calendar, thanks largely to people like Ken Johnson, who I wouldn't be able to put all that together, but we can actually see, like, okay, it says this specific day. We can look and see if it falls on a festival day or something like that. And even prophetically, it answers amazing questions. There's a big debate. Do the two witnesses come in the first half or second half of the tribulation? Well, in my mind, that's settled now. It has to be the first half. And I go into the book as to why it has to do with they had what's called a leap week every 5 or 6 years. When you look at the prophetic day counts of the two witnesses, or of all the other stuff in the second half of the tribulation, it all fits perfectly. So in the second half, there's probably not a leap week there. In the first half, the two witnesses stuff, it makes a lot more sense if you have that extra week, because then you start seeing festival days that line up with them. And so in my mind, they have to come in the first half of the tribulation. So things like, and there's other reasons too why that's the case, where you don't need the calendar for that. But it's little things like that, like just knowing those day counts, having the calendar, and being able to actually count it out. It's explosive. It's amazing in terms of prophecy.
So how do we when we think about, at least in the Bible, that the month begins on the new moon?
Mm-hmm.
So that's very lunar, right?
Not exactly.
So yeah, explain that, because again, you see you know.
There's a specific word for moon, and there's a specific word for new month. And if you're using a lunar calendar, it would be one and the same. But when you go through the scriptures in the Old Testament and the New Testament Greek, the Greek and the Hebrew both, it's actually
Lord, Shawnee asked us to pray for a 3-year-old son of a friend of hers. Apparently, he's not very well. Lord, can you step in and do what you do and try and make him better, Lord? Because we're saying prayers for him. We've been asked to say prayers for him, and that's what we're doing, Lord. Can you step in and do your thing, please? Amen. I'm not good at prayers, guys. You know that.
it's actually the word for new month.
Instead, and so
It doesn't really say new moon.
So yeah, Chodesh, right? I mean, so you have
Prayers for Vinny,
that's
Lord.
very important, because again, here you have this. I would say, I don't know, maybe it's forced on it, forced on the text. That Chodesh is this idea of a new moon rather than a new month.
Yes, it's really important that way. Along with what you were saying, one thing I thought was fascinating is we had the Yom Kippur War, and in 1973, and we just had the war started with Hamas last year. So when you look at the dates of when they start, it's not the same date on the Gregorian, the modern Jewish calendar, the Arabic calendar, or any other calendar. But on the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, it's the exact same day. And that's just one, and you could say that's a coincidence. But when you start seeing all those kind of coincidences, that's what makes it really interesting to look in the study of prophecy and other things.
So let's talk about then the debate that's happening in the sense, you know, we have the state of Israel, you know, here they are, you know, what is it, year 5784 or something like that, right? Whatever the year is. But yet that is based on a Pharisaical calendar. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about these two, for those that might not know anything about this. Like, well, yeah, but I know I follow the Jews, I follow Israel, I'm a supporter of Israel, and that's fine. But their calendar says it's, you know, 5784 or whatever. But what's this idea with the Essene calendar? Let's talk about the differences there. Where did it originate from? This difference.
The major place there's an ancient Pharisee document called the Seder Olam. It's a historical book. It dates from about 160 AD, and it talks about the fact that at one particular point, there was a rabbi named Yoshi that didn't want people to associate Daniel chapter 9 with the coming of Messiah. So he said the prophecy in Daniel 9 is from the going forth to rebuild a Jerusalem, that command, to the destruction of that temple. Now, that's only 40 years difference. And of course, you can't do that. He was kind of laughed out, but he came up with 2 other theories about how that was going to change the era of the Persians, change the dates on that stuff. And still, no one liked it because you just can't do that. But then there was the dispersion and all the other stuff. So then what?
Diane, seeing posts like that really makes you feel good. Like they want to put the 10 Commandments in schools and that. So it's not everyone's giving in over in your country. People are really doing what they can. And that's really nice to see stuff like that, because they're going to cop a lot of flack for it. We know that.
Happens in the 2nd or 3rd century, Rabbi Hillel recreated the calendar, and all of a sudden we have this missing 167 years. And so from that time forward, we've had the lunar calendar with that number on it. And if you go back to the Talmud, which actually quotes the Seder Olam as accurate history, you can see that they quote it, they look at it as legitimate, but they still hold on to the other system. So we've got actual written documents on how and where those dates changed.
I think it's important too to remember that during this time, there was a great amount of even really the 1st century into the 2nd century. We think about Justin Martyr. There was a great level of Christian evangelism or Messianic evangelism by Messianic Jews. Of course, as we know, the first Christians were Jews. And so you have this history, and even Justin Martyr in his book, the 2nd century, he's talking with Trypho the Jew, right? And he's having this discussion, and he's talking about Messianic prophecy. And so there was a lot of success as it relates to winning over people who were Jewish based on Messianic prophecy. And so you do see this this rabbinic movement that ended up seeking to change even the text, the Masoretic text, as well as these others, in order to make it not possible for Jesus to be the Messiah. And so they to think in terms of, it might have been, and I think it is true in ancient times, there was such a, for the scribes and others, the transcribers who would copy these Hebrew texts, they were very serious and respectful. But later, when you have such success going on with Jesus being received as and so obviously, right, fulfilling messianic prophecy, that the early rabbis were like, again, after Jesus died in first, second century, we need to fix this. We need to change this. We need to limit the opportunity for Jesus to be seen as the Messiah. I mean, there's definitely so this comes into play then as it relates to the calendar issues.
Oh yeah, for sure. And it's really interesting too, because going along with that, in academia, there's this big mystery, like what happened to the Essenes? They just disappeared and they left all of their scrolls behind. Well, one thing that, and this was something new that I learned that I didn't write about in the first book, but it's in the second book, is there was an ancient custom, I guess you could call it, or ritual, where they looked at the text as so holy, they weren't just, if they were done with them, or they weren't just going to throw them away. So they would actually.
Okay, Shawnee, I was only off by 10 minutes, wasn't I? Good night.
Like bury them or put them in pots and put them in caves. And so they would do that. So that's probably why a lot of those were left behind. But the Essenes were the early Christians. Those were most likely the ones that, when you read through the Gospels, there are some times where Jesus just like walks into a room and everybody gets saved, basically. But then there are other times he's saying everything he can say and you just can't make headway with some people. Well, I think that's the difference between who's the Essene and who's the Pharisee or Sadducee, because the Essenes had all these really specific prophecies of what to look for with the Messiah. They knew exactly what it was. They knew that it was that the Messiah was going to be, come in two stages, first coming and second coming. And the Pharisees had a different interpretation of that. They thought it was going to be two different people. And so when they saw all this happening, they knew it and they got saved immediately. Well, those are also the ones that took the Great Commission seriously. And I think, and they also knew there was this prophecy about the temple being destroyed. They knew they had to get out anyway. But they were the first Christians. We come from the Essenes. They went out, they took what scrolls they could, buried the rest, and went out and preached the gospel to the world. And we're the benefactors of that. And to me, just the fact that we have that rich of history that most of the church doesn't know about, and actually a lot of Jewish people, unfortunately, don't know about either. Just the fact that that's there is just mind-blowing.
Well, let's talk about what a lot of people want to talk about. And I think, because we all think we are all guilty of loving dates. I mean, whether it's date setting, whether it's date suggesting, or maybe it's just hopeful. I would love to know the date of the rapture or the date of the arrival of the second coming. And so let's talk about the 2025 date. Okay, there's this date. It's not just manufactured out of thin air.
Excuse me, can I ask you a favour? It's not for me, it's for my mum.
For my mom.
Why, again, for the average person that doesn't do this like what you guys do in the sense of, study full time and everything, why should 2025 have any significance at all? Let's talk about that.
Well, basically, just really quickly, they have a calendar. And their concept is there are 7,000 years between the creation.
This is the Essenes have a calendar.
Okay. Yeah, between the creation in Genesis and the creations of a new heaven and a new earth. So that encompasses 6,000 years of man's history and a millennial reign. They have that all mapped out. So theoretically, if that's correct, the last 1,000 years starts in the year 6,000. And they divide these into Jubilee periods, 50-year periods, which sometimes they call generations. And so with this, they mark the age of creation, the age of Torah, and the age of grace, and then a millennial reign. So not trying to set dates per se, but on their calendar, that last part should start in the year 6,000. So the last generation or the last 50-year period from before the year 6,000 would start in 2026. So the year 2025 is the Jubilee or the 50th year of a 50-year period. And so a lot of the scrolls talk about the fact that prophecy can happen at any time, but the bulk of prophecies occur at the change of the ages and the change of the Jubilee periods. So when we're looking at that and we think about Jesus talking about the last generation, that kind of thing, we see that a lot of prophecies will probably happen in 2026 to 2075. Now, like I would have guessed the war with Hamas would have started a couple years from now, but it actually started, last year.
Yep. So in thinking about this, I know, my background's in the ancient Near East, and so you have the biblical chronology, the kings and everything else, and then they do a lot of regnal years and fifth king of fifth year of such and such. Well, in thinking about that, you have the trying to connect with an absolute date, in the sense of especially connecting with Egypt. Egypt is very helpful when you look about the different dynasties of Egypt. So in that case, you have whether it's the Egyptian chronology or even the biblical chronology, here you have the Essene chronology. So you have these different calendars out there. I guess for us, we're sitting here living in the Gregorian chronology, right?
Right.
So, Josh, how do we get how do we anchor? How do you anchor the Essene calendar anywhere connected with the Gregorian calendar, which will allow us to understand why we're in 2025? Well, shouldn't 2,000 years been there? So where does it anchor at?
Yeah, there are definitely differences, but Ken has actually developed a really wonderful free tool on a website called dsscalendar.org, where it superimposes the Essene calendar right onto our Gregorian calendar. So you can look at, and it does it for year to month to day. We also do have a print version that he and I worked on together. People are interested in that if they want to hang it on their wall, but it's a free resource, and you can use that to see, like, okay, so today's this day, what would that be on the Essene calendar? So that helps out a lot too. So then you don't have to do a bunch of math every single time you want to figure it out. And one thing that I wanted to mention too about the prophecies being in the last Jubilee, and the final Jubilee of the age of Torah. So their ages would be 2,000 years apiece, and then there's a final Sabbath age that's only 1,000 years. We would call that the millennial reign of Christ. Well, at the last 50 years of the age of Torah, that was between 25 AD and 75 AD, according to our understanding of or 76 AD. But it's in that time period. Well, the rapture is only one prophecy. There's a lot of prophecies that we have that's going to happen before Jesus returns and sets things straight for the millennial reign. Well, when you think about that, 25 AD, Jesus came the first time probably around 29, 30 AD, somewhere around there.
Starting his ministry.
Yeah, starting his ministry. And then look at all of the prophecies that got fulfilled in a really short amount of time until he was killed in 32 AD in the indwelling of the Holy Spirit and all that. And then finally you get a few decades where things happen too until the destruction of the temple. But all of that really important stuff that sets the stage for the next age, they didn't have to wait till 75, 76 AD for that to occur. That happened pretty early in the final Jubilee of the age of Torah. So while we can't put a specific date, we could say that, yeah, according to the Essene calendar, 2076 should be like the first day of like the new age, if their calendar is correct and if it continues the way that we think it's going to. But that doesn't mean that we have to wait all that time or even 7 years before that necessarily for the rapture. There's a lot of different ways that this could pan out. We could have an early rapture, and you could have a gap between the rapture and the tribulation. That's one possibility. You could also have a gap between the end of the tribulation and when the next age starts. How long is it going to take for Jesus to judge everybody? How long is it going to take to set the world up and to build the amazing temple and city that we read about at the end of Ezekiel, which of course we all believe that's all totally literal. It's not figurative. Well, that stuff takes time, and I don't think Jesus is just going to come down, snap his fingers, and everything's different. I think that stuff is going to have to be built. So we don't necessarily have to wait that long. We can't put a date on the rapture, of course. There's nothing in the Dead Sea Scrolls saying any kind of date or anything like that. It's really consistent with biblical theology. There's little hints of the rapture throughout it, but it doesn't give us a date. So we don't know. But so the dates that we have are more about a time frame rather than a specific date. So we're looking at a 50-year time frame where a lot of things could happen early on, just like it did at the end of the age of Torah. So I think that can kind of help hopefully relieve some people when they hear 2075. I got to wait that long. I'm not going to live that long.
Let's talk about that because and I just like to throw things out. Right? That's where my mind works. So we know on the Gregorian calendar that we are, if Jesus, most New Testament scholars believe Jesus was crucified and resurrected on 32 or 33 AD. Okay, that's the kind of those 2 years. Some people will say 29, but that's not the best date. Is that 32, 33 framework? Okay, so I don't think we've lost too much understanding in our calendar. What I mean by that is here. Let's fast forward to 2032. Like so, here we got 8 years from now. Well, it's pretty solid then that there's 2,000 years going from the time of Jesus to this period of from 32 AD to 2032. And that is, well, that's an age. That's an age, right? I mean, according to the Essene not calendar, but according to the Essene chronology of 2,000 years being an age. So is it possible, and we also know that again, 70 AD
Save time with smart home tech flex.
Robotic vacuum, $279. Amazon Echo Pop, $79.
AD the temple was destroyed. So are things based? Could it be off? Could have the new age began at the time of Jesus's resurrection, and then the temple gets destroyed 40 years later in the still new age of grace? Could there be? Is it off? Could it be by 40 years off? Because here's what I'm saying is that if let's say we come to 2075.
Yeah.
And
Diane, I saw that on the news a couple of days ago. It lit the whole sky up. That was crazy.
We'll still be here, Lord willing, maybe. Okay, that's 40 years from now. Well, no, it's longer than that. It's 50 years. No, maybe I won't be here. Okay, but let's say we're sitting here and we're old and decrepit by that time at 2075. But now we're looking, hey, it's been 2,040 years from the time of Jesus's resurrection. That seems a little bit weird, doesn't it? That you would have not 2,000, you'd have 2,040. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, so the way that I understand it, they would have a specific date as the beginning of the next age, even if it doesn't specifically line up with anything prophetic on that date. So their final Jubilee in the Age of Torah would have started 25 AD. And I don't know that there was anything specific that occurred there. Now we would say, well, the church age began in 32, 33 AD with the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. And yeah, it did. That's when like the church really started.
We're coming up to 2000 year anniversary.
But the specific age and the way that they lined out their chronology would have been 25 to 75. So the way that I kind of explain it in the book is it seems like in these final 50-year periods, and you can even see this in every age. You see this in the first age too with the Tower of Babel and Call of Abraham and all that. But it seems like there's this period of time where prophecies start to happen to get ready for the next age. So that when that,
hey Jay, good to see you, mate. How's the family?
Hits, everything is set in place for the next stage to begin, even if some of that started early. So it would be like if I was going to throw a birthday party next Friday, well, I have some things to prepare before then. So I got to get a cake. Maybe I do that tomorrow. I got to get the presents. I got to hire attractions. And I would spend the rest of this week like doing all that. So I'm doing things to get ready for the party, but that's not specifically the party, even though they're all going to play important roles when the party happens. So that at Friday at 3 o'clock, let's say, the party happens. I think it's kind of the same way. So the way that I look at it, these final Jubilee periods, it's almost as if these two ages are kind of like melding together, where you get the start of one while the other one's winding down. And so you get this kind of blending thing. So I don't think that we would say necessarily that, well, since 32 AD, that was the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, so that's the start of that age. I don't think the Essenes would have saw it like that. That would have been one prophetic thing that happened in that age.
At the tail end
to prepare for the next age. But the official start would have been 75, 76 AD. But that's also why it's really difficult.
Okay, it's clear, and I was hoping it wouldn't do that.
It's more of like time periods that we look at. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the thing that I would add to that is I think we can rock solid set for their
Okay, that's
calendar
usually
system.
good.
Not necessarily the prophecies on it. So, for instance, on their system, which ends at 75, they talked about the first coming of the Messiah when he would atone for our sins.
Oh, it's summer vacation over there for you, isn't it? We're in the middle of winter nearly.
Nature. And the event that would occur is one Shemitah after the end of the 9th Jubilee of that Luna. And so if you look at the end of the age being 75 minus a whole Jubilee period, which is 25, and then you go forward to Shemitah, which is a 7-year period, it brings us to 32. So they're saying, and it's scroll 11Q13, they're saying that the Messiah would take care of our sin nature 32, 33 AD is what we would put on our calendar. So that, lets it sink in really, really well, give or take a year. And so that means the end of their calendar year for the year 6000 would be 75 or 76, 2075, 2076. So I think that's pretty rock solid. As far as the other prophecies, like he's saying, I mean, you've got Jesus being born, 30 years later dying, the church age starting, several years later, the destruction of the Jerusalem temple, 2 years later, taking down of the Essene temple, and then the end of the age a couple of years later, and then several years later, you got the Bar Kokhba rebellion, and when that finally ended, that pretty much ended everything, and then the Great Dispersion. So you've got a 150-year period there where all sorts of things happen as a group, kind of. And so we're seeing that today, actually. If you take the 150 years before the year 6000, you had the Balfour Declaration, you had the establishment of Israel in 1948, the taking back of the Temple Mount in 67, and all the other things that have happened, the new priesthood, the practice sacrifices that have started up. So all those things are going in process.
So the year 6000, what Gregorian year would that be?
2075.
Oh, okay. But yeah, because that
would be the year 6000.
Okay. So let me ask you this question, and again, thinking out loud here, is so ultimately, if we're comparing what we've experienced in reality, in the sense of the Christian era, from a Christian perspective, we would recognize theologically that the age of grace began at Pentecost, right? And and we're coming up on that 2,000 years. Here again, we're 9 years short, or so, 8 to 9 years short. So does that make any difference in the sense of understanding that the age of grace truly, now not in an unseen way, but in a practical way, truly began at the time after Jesus' death and resurrection?
I would think it could, and I think it depends on how you use the term. Like, for instance, I know in a lot of the church fathers, they talk about how the Antichrist persecutes us, the believers, the church. And everybody says, oh, well, that's got to be, post-trib rapture type stuff. And when you look at the way they use the church, they're talking about believers. They actually define it from Abraham forward. So when they say church, and that's not how we use church, and I'm not saying you're right or wrong, but they mean believers, okay? And so when we
historically, even all the way back.
Right.
Okay.
So when we say the age of grace, you and I are talking about the church age. And I think they're talking about the age of grace on a calendar, which may be different.
Smelly night guard, polydent retainer and mouth guard cleanser removes 99.9% of odor-causing bacteria in 3 minutes.
Oh, stop the ad.
So the church age and their age of grace might be different than what we refer to as the church age.
So yeah, I mean, anything you want to add to that?
Oh no, that's exactly right. So you ask any Christian nowadays, like how long is the church age, and they'd say, well, it's been about 2,000 years, but we don't know how long it's going to last. It could be another 6,000 years. But if you were to ask an Essene the same question, when they hear age, they're thinking a 2,000-year period specifically. So they would just say 2,000 years. So yeah, it just depends on how we use the terms.
Yeah, because obviously, even in terms of, the Torah as it relates to the 613 commands, I mean, that came with Moses.
Yeah.
In 1400 BC, 1445, 1444 BC. So that's certainly many centuries after Abraham.
Right.
And so to have it be super tight like that,
Exactly.
It's hard to believe that
Yeah.
the Torah began with Abraham.
No, it's still the age of Torah even before the Torah came to be, because the age of Torah would have started with the call of Abraham, but it was again setting up everything that needed to be for that age to operate and work. So there's a lot of different prophecies and different ways on how things can be, when things can happen within certain ages. But it's like, what is that period mostly known for? That's the age of Torah.
As a matter of fact, according to some of the manuscripts, it talks about the age of Torah or teaching is supposed to start with the guy that starts the group of people. So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob kind of are the ones that started Israel, and the nation of Israel would bring Messiah. So that's the start of the age of Torah. And when you look at their chronology, the call of Abraham when he was 52, not when he went down to Canaan, but when he was called, actually was the year 2000 on their calendar. So that hit exactly at the end of an age.
So, I mean, so here we're talking about, we're coming up on the year, 2025. We've got 6 months left to 24 or so, 7 months left. Then what's significant then in the sense of trying to explain the scene calendar? What's happening? Let's go to March of 2025, spring equinox. Let's talk about.
Yeah, Diane, if I don't have to leave the house and it's cold and wet outside, I just stay in my PJs and my dressing gown, because there's no point getting dressed. I might as well just sit around like a slob.
What is significant about that?
It begins this next March begins the 50th year of this Jubilee period. And then the following year is the last generation or the last Jubilee before that. So we should start seeing a lot of prophecy fulfilled. And we have seen things that we've never seen before, like Iran actually attacking Israel. That's prophesied in several scrolls and in scriptures, but we've never seen that before. And this was short-lived, but it's not the only time this is going to happen, because there's some great details in that. We've seen a lot of things happen with Israel, and we will begin to see a lot of wars, a lot of expansion, a lot of different things. Zephaniah, Obadiah talks about the time when they colonized the Negev, they take back Gaza, they control Lebanon up to Zarephath, which is the 6 miles north of the Litani River, which is where they're saying they're going to take and control that now as part of and whether that actually happens or whether it happens in some political figure later on gives the land back, which has happened multiple times. Either way, we see it in prophecy. So there's a lot of interesting things happening.
Anything, Joe?
Hey, Bill, good to see you, mate.
So, I know what all of you are thinking out there, and I'm going to be your advocate right now, okay? Now, I don't want to believe that we have until 2075.
Nah, we haven't got there.
Well, that's just till the beginning of the millennium.
Right.
So we got a tribulation. We have all sorts of prophecies that need to be fulfilled in that time, and they could all come early, because it's perfectly reasonable to have the end of the tribulation and still have some decades before the next age starts. And because there might be things that need to be done. Again, how long does it take for Jesus to judge everybody at that time? How long does it take to build the temple and for people to, beat their swords into plowshares and to get the word around the whole world? This is the way that things are now. How long does it take to build that temple in that city?
You're talking like the millennial temple.
Yeah, the millennial, that we read about in Ezekiel. Like, how long does all of that take? I don't think it's going to be the day that Jesus plants his feet on the ground, all of a sudden this stuff is miraculously just there. It could be, and I don't know for sure, again, because there's a lot of different ways this could play out, but it could be that takes time. And again, another option is you could have an early rapture and a later tribulation. And you could have, because the rapture isn't what starts the tribulation. It's, the covenant, the signing of the confirmation of the covenant with Benny is what starts the tribulation. So there's a theory out there that it's possible you could have the rapture happen and you could have years in between that and the tribulation. So that's a possibility as well. I'm like you. I don't want to believe that we have to wait till I'll be 90 years old if I make it that long. So there are different ways, and it might be that, but there are ways to look at it where there's nothing preventing the rapture from happening immediately today before we even finish this interview. There's nothing preventing that. And then you can still have all of those prophecies happen within that period and still have the calendar make sense. Or maybe Jesus was just literally, I'm going to cut the day short and we're not going to wait till 2075. So there's God can do whatever he wants. But I think the consistent view would be to look at 2075, 2076 to be the time where everything is put in place, everything is finished, where we can start the first day of the millennial reign. Everything's done. Temples built, cities built. Everybody knows the new rules. They know the festivals. All the other nations know that they got to come up for tabernacles, and just everything's done. And I would think just practically that's probably going to take some time to set up. I don't think it's going to be able to be done the last day of the tribulation. But, again, there's different ways to look at it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The whole idea of the scripture says that those days will be cut short. That might be 5 days, or it might be days like a couple of decades.
Could it be 5 decades? Could it be a whole jubilee cut short?
I would assume. I wouldn't think it'd be a whole jubilee. Of course, if that's the case, the rapture should have happened a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So no, I guess not.
Yeah, because you start thinking about, again, I love we're not date setting here, but it's fun to speculate. Isn't it?
Sure.
I mean, no one's setting a date, but it's fun to think out loud about the possibilities, and we're all to be.
I reckon 2030 to 2032 at the absolute latest before the end.
And no matter what we decide today or not figure out or whatever, we're still going to get up tomorrow and do the Lord's work. Okay, no one's quitting their job.
Amen.
I find it. Go ahead.
I think one point that we need to remember too is we're talking about calendar systems, which may or may not be 100% accurate. If we looked at the modern Jewish calendar and tried to pinpoint the year 6000, it's over 220 years away.
Yeah.
I'd much rather have it be 50 years instead of.
The future of money is exchanging over 30 currencies at competitive rates.
Instead of 220.
Yeah.
So if we're looking at the Gregorian calendar, I think we missed it by 24 years. So it's just like, it's a calendar system.
Well, and that's kind of what I look at too, is, again, we are, when Pope Gregory, again, Gregorian, when he's looking at, the Julian calendar, the Roman calendar, and then he starts like, we need to make this a little bit better, at least Christianize it, right? Certainly that's what he did as a Catholic. Well, he looked back and he could see there were some discrepancies. I think he dropped like 13 days or 16 days off. He's like, well, this doesn't work. So we're going to evaporate those and we're going to squeeze it all together. Which again, that's the nature of looking at different calendar systems. Egyptians used to have a 10-day week. I mean, you have stuff like that. So I think what I look at is, that's what I was leading up to. Well, if the 32-33 date of Jesus's death and resurrection is relatively accurate, which I think most scholars would recognize that's true, then we're coming up on an age ending.
Yeah.
So even if it's not necessarily connected to the specifics of the Essene calendar, their idea of what an age would be as 2,000 years. And in my mind, I like the idea much better. I'm sorry, guys. No offense. No offense. I like the idea of thinking, which again, it's not a prophecy by any means, of thinking that the church had an opportunity to evangelize the world for a full age. And that would end roughly around 32 or 33 AD.
Diane, that court's a toothless tiger. They can't enforce their rules. I think they've already convicted Queen Elizabeth for that 800 children missing in Canada. It's a toothless tiger, though.
Yeah, Jesus might come back in that year to finish what he started and there's still time for the tribulation before that. I mean, and if that's the case, man, the rapture should be coming up pretty soon.
Because what I find fascinating is going back to some of the other stuff that you and I have talked before, Josh, about even Apophis and thinking in terms not so much of the 2029 date but of the 2036 date.
Yeah,
which I find interesting too. That again, I don't think we can prove that Apophis arrives at 3.5 years into the tribulation to that level of specificity. But if we were to go with that as a theory, I know we're talking to you and Derek and even Tom was, then you subtract 3.5 years roughly. That brings you to the fall of 2025.
Yeah, it does.
So you think, oh wow, but if we were to look at it differently in the sense of a 33 date or 32 with that 2036, in the middle of 2036, and you take 3.5 off of that, it brings you back. Works. It brings you back if Apophis was to hit the earth hypothetically in 2036, because even Neil deGrasse Tyson, I have a clip from him not too long ago where he describes that the 2029 arrival of Apophis. He said he said there's this keyhole, this is the language that we use, and if it comes through,
this is only posted 8 hours ago, but I think we've seen this yesterday.
And it's supposed to come at under 20,000, around 20,000 miles near the surface of the Earth in 2029. Well, the moon's at 240,000. So the way he was describing it was, if it comes through this keyhole, it's going to affect the trajectory, the orbital trajectory of the Apophis, so that when it comes back, this is his words.
Yeah.
Secular guy, he's not a Christian. He said, if it comes through this the 600-mile keyhole in 2029 and just scrapes us, it will hit us in 2036.
Yeah.
I found that really amazing that he was willing to say that publicly, because he's got a lot at stake in his mindset. But again, that idea would then fit with the 2033.
The dates still work.
The dates work.
Yeah.
Which gives me some hope that I won't be. I was born in 1974. So
You're still young.
Well, at the end of it, I'll be 102, gentlemen.
I was born in 84, so.
Okay, so you'll be a little younger. You'll be a little younger than me.
You're both young. I was born in 60. What is your boy? It's been so long. 65.
65.
Yeah, 1965.
Oh, wow. So we got 20 years apart, 10 years apart. Yeah, so you'll be 110.
If I do the Essene diet and use the herbal medicine just right, I might still be here. Well, I think it's interesting, no matter how you look at it, all those dates and speculations, you notice it's all in the last Jubilee.
Yeah.
Which is in the last generation, according to the scrolls.
Yeah.
There's even another one, a 2068 date, and that's 7 years from 2075.
It really is, the 2068 Apophis date. So, I mean, needless to say, I think all of us, regardless of whether we look at the Essene calendar, where we look at anything else, the average person, I mean, come on, guys, the average person that is just all of us. Here we are, I mean, thinking about the world. I think about and when I mean the average person, I'm thinking about, not in an academic sense. I don't really mean it that way. I just mean like my brothers or my sisters, the average American out there that's sitting there just living life and not necessarily focused on prophecy. They're looking around and they're going, man, the world's changed.
Yeah.
Something has changed. And so when we see this, and we see Israel becoming a nation in 1948, them controlling the old city in 1967 in Jerusalem, we are not. This isn't. I don't see. Oh well, Jesus will come back in 1,000 years. No, the fact that God brought Israel back in 1948 was the big sign.
Yeah.
That we are approaching the end of the age, and now, of course, we've seen a prophecy begin to unfold. So, as we look, we don't even need the Essene calendar to tell us that, right?
Right.
We can just look around and say, yes, here we are. But then to have some of these other calendars come and they seem very consistent is pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting too, because according to the Essenes, at the end of every age, there's always an apostasy. So in the first age, there's the Tower of Babel incident. Second age, we got everything with Jesus and the Pharisees, and there was clearly apostasy going on there. And then you look at if this is the end of our age, you look at the world today, this is so different than any other time in history, just with the technology that we have. I mean, and it's almost hard to realize it because we've been born into it. So it just seems normal to us. But human beings, as far as we know, have never lived like this. Like this is so weird and different. And it's brought up so much like debauchery and really you can call it apostasy. Like it's brought up so much opportunities for more evil, more than we've ever seen in the history of the world. And to me, it's like, that's too weird to just not be anything. Like, why is it now all of a sudden that we have this big technological revolution? I mean, it wasn't that long ago we were still using horses and carriages and stuff. And why is it now? I mean, why couldn't the Greeks have done that? They could have. They were smart, they had math and everything, and any other nation could have done that at any other time. But it was like there was something restraining it, charged word, but and it seems like that whatever that restraining is kind of lifting, and all of a sudden we live in this crazy weird world, and it's just we're in a place, especially now, where you cannot believe anything. We have more evidence for things than we've ever had before. We have video evidence, and Nobody ever had that before, but you can't believe anything you see on TV. You can't believe any video you see. If you see a video of Donald Trump saying something, you don't know if it's a deep fake or if that was actually real. And that's like the world we're in now. I mean, again, I'm only like 40 years old, but it's so different from the 80s. I mean, we didn't have any of this stuff.
Yeah.
And but now, I mean, and it's
think of it, the 80s, how dead the 80s was.
I love playing against
Without the net and all that. Things have just exploded since the 80s. It's a different culture on all the planet, all the countries.
real people.
You suck at this.
exponentially, it's getting faster and faster and faster to the point where every year doesn't feel anything like the last. So for that to be just nothing and just to be business as usual, it's not significant at all. I'm not buying it. I think we're at the end of an age here, and I think this kind of thing is what we'd expect.
I think we have these are those correspondences that come to play where we can look around. Again, the average person knows that that the world has changed. Mm-hmm. Again, even unbelievers are, what in the world? What has happened, especially to our country and other things? All the wokeness, all the gender confusion. I mean, this is crazy stuff. And then to have these other convergences of the calendars come into the, if you want more information on it, certainly go to prophecywatchers.com, check out our bookstore. Both of these guys are on there, and we carry all of your material.
Yeah, I should mention too, my new book, the super expanded version, 712 pages. It's going to be available at prophecywatchers.com. And again, I'm only a few days away from the launch. It could be by the time this airs, it might already be out. So people should check out prophecywatchers.com and keep checking every day because it's going to be on there soon.
Yeah, and we'll definitely come back and do a one-on-one interview for sure on that. And once I get my greedy little hands on it and, to do it. And so, both of you guys kind of share, in addition to, obviously you've joined us here, which we're excited about. But where can people find out more information about what you're doing?
Oh, sure. Well, my other website is dailyrenegade.com. And that's
okay, guys, I'll switch to James Cadiz and his take on the Iranian president dying.
Going on right now. I wanted to wait until I had confirmed information in front of me, which is why I chose to not broadcast until 2:30 in the morning. Now, you're not going to hear the typical loud James because I am broadcasting from my phone in my office, in my house, and I can't wake anybody up. But folks, there is so much going on, and I thought that I would talk about it now because it's important that you get the information. Now, we are going to provide a lot of analysis for you in the upcoming week, probably within the next upcoming several weeks. But what you hear right now is really, really important, okay? First and foremost, we know this. We know that Ibrahim Raisi is dead, the president of Iran. We also know that Hussein Amir Abdullahian is also dead. Now, this is really important because Ibrahim Raisi and Amir Abdullahian is two of the most powerful.
Imagine the Prime Minister of Iran when he's dead, he shows up to get judged. There's been a lot of Muslims that have died, and when they seen Jesus, and Jesus, they said, "Is that you, Allah?" And Jesus is real angry. He says, "I'm not your Allah." So imagine the Prime Minister, he didn't change at all. So he would have got the full wrath of Jesus, and he'll know just how wrong he is by now. And he's been in hell for what, 48 hours, but I bet it feels like 10 years to him already.
Powerful people in Iran. As a matter of fact, the only person more powerful than these two are going to be Khomeini himself. Now, this is really critical that we understand this. Now, what happened? It was a helicopter crash. There were 3 helicopters that were coming back from the Azerbaijan region. Sorry if I mispronounce a bunch of stuff. It's late. I've been up for almost 24 hours. It's been a crazy time coming on the heels of a Sunday night. But they're coming back from this Azerbaijani region that is in Iran, very mountainous type of a region. There were 3 helicopters that were involved in this. 2 of those helicopters got to their destination safely. The 3rd helicopter that had Raisi and Amir Abdullahian were all in there. That crashed. Okay, now this is really important because you have to understand what this would be sort of the equivalent to in the United States of America. It would be the equivalent to the vice president and potentially like the secretary of state or the speaker of the house being in the same helicopter and dying. And of course, what you have to understand is Khomeini himself doesn't do any of the interacting, politically speaking, with other world leaders or anything like that. He is, in essence, the grand ruler. He's the one who actually rules in Iran. He's the big decision maker. But you have to understand that Raisi, who's the president, is the one that's going to the UN. He's the one that's talking to people, other world leaders, and so on and so forth. And you have to also understand that Hossein Amir Abdullahian is a very, very, very evil and deadly man. By the way, both of them are. Ibrahim Raisi is known as the butcher of Tehran, right? And Amir Abdullahian is also a very, very evil man. He is one of the foremost dominant leaders in the IRGC. He might be the foreign minister, but he's one of the dominant leaders. And by the way, I point this out because this is really important. I did a video on this, and I hope you guys will see this online because we did do a lot of addressing with this issue that we want you guys to be aware of in terms of what's happening and what's taking place. And the name of the video, and I'm going to find it because I think it's really important that you go watch it if you have not watched it. I did a couple of videos, actually. One of them I'm going to link to the end of this one that I think is really, really important. Actually, I'm going to put both links to this in the description. But one is, in essence, the president of Iran who is speaking to the United Nations. And I have a video of him talking. I did a lot of analysis on that and explained why so much of what he's actually doing and saying is just completely radically demonic and dark, pretty evil thing. And then the other video that I did is called, and it's a recent one, "The UN Just Tried to Destroy Israel." And in this video, I actually spent time actually showing you the speech that the UN ambassador from Israel gave, where he actually talked about how evil Abdullahian is and some of the things that are actually going on with his terrorist participation in the IRGC. That's a very, very important thing. And then I did another video, again, that I think is super critical, that deals with Iran, and one that's very, very important. And that is called "Iran's President Has Made a Clear Warning to Israel." Iran's president has made a clear warning to Israel. You'll be able to see the president of Iran directly speaking to the UN, and it gives you a really good idea in terms of what he's about and how absolutely evil and demonic he is. I guarantee you, folks, these are people that are very likely not in a good place right now. As a matter of fact, I hate to say this, I don't want to be the type of person that says something like this, but they're definitely burning in hell. They're evil people. Yeah. The butcher of Tehran, Ibrahim Raisi, is responsible for the death of probably north of 100,000 Iranians.
No way.
With this president dying, and with one of the most influential leaders in the IRGC dying, right? The foreign minister, you know who are lighting firecrackers and fireworks and celebrating right now? Many Iranians. You're not seeing Jews doing it so publicly in Israel right now. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of silence happening right now. And there's a lot of reason for that because the geopolitical implications of what just happened are really, really significant. Now, why?
Iran is run by the Persian bloodline. They're not Arabs. The people are Arabs and the leaders are Persian. They're two different races.
Is this such a huge loss and a destabilizing loss for Iran? Well, there's a bunch of reasons. Okay, first of all, Khomeini is getting older, and he is not far from passing away. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of people that believe that he is struggling with some type of cancer. And you have to understand, Ibrahim Raisi is very, very close to Khomeini. As a matter of fact, they literally are mirrors of one another. And it has been generally understood that Khomeini was looking to IEC to actually be the one who would take his place. Remember, Ibrahim IEC is a very religious man. And when I say religious, I don't mean correctly religious. He's demonically religious. He is a fundamentalist in Islam, specifically in the Shiite Islamic beliefs. And that's a really weird belief, by the way. Matter of fact, part of that belief involves the idea that Jesus is going to come back with one of their leaders and destroy all the Jews and all the Christians. It's really crazy. But they believe this, and it's something that they talk about quite a bit. And quite frankly, it's just very, very evil stuff. But let's talk about the geopolitical implications here. If Raisi is no longer the person who can take control for Khomeini, Khomeini is going to be in a very desperate situation because he needs to find somebody that has his type of idealism that will carry on what he seeks to carry on with the kind of strength that he's been leading with. It's not very likely he's going to find anybody quite like that because all those people have pretty much died. I will tell you this, not a good idea to go against Israel and come against God and in essence think that God isn't going to judge you for this. Now, I want to say this, they were in a very old helicopter. I don't remember what helicopter they said it was. It was like a Bell 222, something like that. Those were parts that could only be gotten in the United States of America, and if they got it from anywhere else, it would have been a black market type thing. So the parts on those helicopters probably were in terrible shape. I would guarantee you the fact that those helicopters were not properly maintained, so it's kind of stupid of them to fly in that weather. My understanding is when the helicopters took off, the weather was clear. But remember, even with an instrument rating, flying a helicopter in that region is just absolutely crazy, right? Maybe they did it for security reasons. I don't understand why they did what they did, but it was sort of a game of Russian roulette getting in a helicopter like that. With that said, some things are happening right now that we have to be paying attention to. First of all, Khomeini just announced a few hours ago that Iran's first vice president, Mohammad Mokhtar, would be taking over as the acting president until elections are held in 50 days or so. Now, what's really interesting about Mohammad Mokhtar is he's not going to be nearly as hardline as Raisi is. Some people say he might be more. Some people say he might be less. We just don't know. We're not going to understand until we actually see what kind of a leader he becomes and what takes place. I think that if he wants to do what's politically expedient for him, at least within the regime of Khomeini, he might end up doing exactly what we've seen Raisi do. I'm not sure. We don't know what's going to happen with that. But let me tell you where the real geopolitical implications are, what the real geopolitical implications are of what's happening right now. First of all, Iran is technically in the weakest state that it has ever been, at least within recent years. You've got a lot of complications that right now sit with the JCPOA. And for those of you that don't know about this joint comprehensive agreement, it isn't worth the piece of paper that it's actually written on. But the JCPOA has made a way for the, for lack of a better term, for the sunset clause to actually be recreated in a way that causes them to be able to play around with nuclear weapons. We know that under the rule of Raisi, he's enriched uranium a lot, well, I think very much weapons-grade uranium. He's done that, further escalating all kinds of problems with not only Israel, but of course the West. And he's actually enriched uranium at a level that no other leader before him has. And as a matter of fact, there's a story that I'm going to be releasing on Friday where I actually talk about the enrichment of this uranium and how a leader, a recent lawmaker in Iran, actually spoke up about the enrichment of this uranium. And I think it's really interesting. It's a video that I'm releasing on Friday that I think is entitled 3 News Stories You Should Be Following. But more on that to come. What is interesting here and what is really important is to understand what can actually happen, okay? We don't know what kind of pressure is going to now be on Hezbollah to the north. We don't know what kind of support is going to end up going to Iran's proxies. This is going to have an effect on three major terrorist groups that we should probably think about immediately, right? We have to start looking at Hezbollah. We need to find out how much they're going to be changing. Remember, there are attacks that have been escalating dramatically from southern Lebanon, which will be the north, Israel to the north. We don't know what's going to happen with this. Nasrallah has been proving himself to be a very weak leader. And in his weakness, I think there's a lot of fear that he's going to end up getting killed. So I think that he's going to back down when he recognizes that Iran is in a weakened state. Iran, my guess, is going to back down from the position that they're in right now with seeking to attack Israel because of the geopolitical mess that they've created for themselves by the absence of their foreign minister, who happens to be one of the most key guys in the IRGC, and of course, by the absence of the current president. A lot of the diplomatic delegations that have been ran out of Iran, if you want to call them diplomatic delegations, have been ran by the foreign minister and have been ran, of course, by the IEC himself, specifically with the relationship that they have with the UN. This is also really interesting in that the UN was immediate, I mean, very quick, to offer their condolences concerning the IEC's death and concerning the foreign minister's death, but that's because they're in bed with Iran, and they themselves are terrorists. I think the United Nations is a terrorist organization, and probably something that we should talk about at another point, because things are getting really ugly with the UN, and it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. But the other thing that's happening here that's really interesting that we have to just stop for a moment and think through is you also are going to face a problem with the southern Arabian Peninsula, right? So when you talk about the southern portion of the Arabian Peninsula, which would be Yemen, okay? Yemen is going to find themselves in a bit of teeter-tottering or instability, because now their greatest sponsor of terror is going to be putting some of their activity on hold. So the Yemeni Houthis, we don't know what they're going to do. We don't know how this is going to affect the Red Sea. We don't know how this is going to affect Russia. There's a lot of questions as into what's going to take place with Russia. And perhaps one of the more significant variables right now that a lot of people aren't thinking about or looking through, because they wouldn't. There's no way to think about it. You can't predict the death of the president. But my guess is it's going to dramatically affect the position of Hamas. And I think that it's going to very much weaken the position of Hamas. And I think it will open up a very short window, albeit, for Israel to act very dramatically and effectively in eliminating Hamas in Rafah and potentially in Khan Yunis if one of the leaders of Hamas is actually there, as they say. There's also a lot of questioning with Hamas right now in terms of the tunnels, and they're finding out now that many of these tunnels that were in the southern portion of Gaza, specifically in this area of Rafah, have actually led into Egypt, but that's nothing that we don't know. We've been talking about the fact that that's the possibility. But again, Egypt is taking a very hardline stance in what they're allowing the people that are in the south to do. Specifically, they're concerned about not wanting to see any Palestinian in their country. And there's a big reason for that, because why would they want a Palestinian in the Rafah portion of Egypt? And why would they want Palestinians anywhere near the Sinai, anywhere near the Red Sea, anywhere near Sharm el-Sheikh, anywhere near the Suez Canal? Remember, al-Sisi just kicked out a bunch of Islamic Brotherhood, and Islamic Brotherhood were the people that actually created Hamas. So there's a lot going on here that we really have to just think through. I'll tell you what I'm going to be doing. I am going to be monitoring all of this very closely. We are we have already recorded an episode of Countdown to Eternity where we talk about the geopolitics of this as it relates to the Bible and what could actually happen. I did that with Tom. That's getting released on Wednesday. On Tuesday, I pre-recorded a great live show with David Tall, and we speculated quite a bit on what we could end up seeing as a result of what happened with the death of the Iranian president. And that's before we even know that he had died, but we assumed that we would have a better understanding of what had happened by the time we released that video, and we assumed correctly. And then I'm going to spend a lot of time on Thursday, my Thursday live show, providing a bunch of Mideast analysis. As a matter of fact, my live show on Thursday, I will probably dedicate a solid 2 hours to sitting down and talking about what's going on in the Mideast, because by that time, I'm going to have a whole lot more information. And when I do, I will live go through everything that's going on. We'll get into all of the stories and we'll talk about it. What the Associated Press right now is saying about the things that we're seeing is pretty significant. There's a lot of information about what they are actually confirming. Remember, this stuff is very, 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 very significant. Okay, let me repeat myself. Okay, when you start talking about the rankings, and when you start talking about who is who in Iran, okay, the Ayatollah Khomeini is number one in power. Number two is Raisi. Raisi is dead. Number three, of course, is Amir Abdullahian. He's dead. Okay. By the way, Raisi, I think, is at this point, I think he's like 62, 63 years old. Abdullahian is either 59 or 60. I haven't checked the age here. But what's really interesting here is that so much here is going to change, because remember, the two most powerful people, like number two ranked and number three in Iran, are now dead. You have lots of commanders from the IRGC that are dead. You have leeways to Hezbollah that are dead. It's absolutely crazy. And by the way, there are people that are already beginning to blame the United States of America and Israel for this. Let me read to you some quotes, okay? This is really interesting, right? Let me read to you a portion from the Associated Press. It says this. It says among the dead was Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdullahian, which we talked about, right? Oh, they do confirm that he's age 60. They say the helicopter also carried the governor of Iran's East Azerbaijan province, which, by the way, we will spend some time talking about that, because that is also very significant. In terms of the lineup of power, he's not all that powerful, but he is uniquely influential with respect to the relationship that the Iranians have with Azerbaijan. Of course, Azerbaijan, you need to understand, they are a Shiite nation that has actually a very complicated relationship with Israel, but one that is very amicable. There's a lot of complexities associated with that. They recently actually set up an embassy in Tel Aviv, I believe, which created a lot of ripples, especially with Iran. But Azerbaijan has a very close relationship with Iran, and what Azerbaijan is doing right now to Christians in Armenia and what's happening with Armenians in Azerbaijan is a whole other ball of wax, but it is very interesting, right? But look at what it goes on to say. It says, the other officials of the state-run IRNA news, this was reported by the IRNA, and then it says the IRNA said the crash killed 8 people in all, including 3 crew members on the Bell helicopter, which Iran purchased in the early 2000s. By the way, it's an old Bell helicopter. What's Iran doing with an older Bell helicopter? Look what it says. In the next paragraph, it says aircraft in Iran face a shortage of parts, often flying without safety checks over Western sanctions, because of that former Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif sought to blame the United States for the crash in an interview Monday. Isn't that crazy? Zarif is already blaming the United States of America. Look at his quotes. He says one of the main culprits of yesterday.
I knew they'd blame the States or Israel, and the truth be told, it probably was them.
Yesterday's tragedy is the United States, which embargoed the sale of aircraft and aviation parts to Iran and does not allow the people of Iran to enjoy good aviation facilities. Okay, he goes on to say these will be recorded in the list of U.S. crimes against the Iranian people. All right. Well, quite frankly, it's the Iranian people that brought that. Well, not the Iranian people. It's the leaders of Iran that brought that upon themselves. They're the ones that created the conditions that have allowed these embargoes and these sanctions, and they could have walked away from it. Listen, they could have been, they could have participated in the negotiating table. The Biden administration has given them more than we can possibly imagine. But that's what's going to happen. The next step here is that Iran is going to blame Israel. Iran is going to blame the United States of America, and they are going to take advantage of this opportunity to create some type of full-scale war. I think that's what's going to happen, and I think we need to wake up to seeing that that's what's going to happen, and that's what's in front of us right now. So there you go. That's what's happening. I would totally encourage you guys to stay close to the YouTube channel. I would definitely subscribe if you're watching this. Also, if you're watching this on Rumble.
He's got the best insights into what's going on in Israel and Iran and that. He's got the best insights, I reckon.
We'll be making things available all throughout. I will be doing a massive bit of update, well, a massive amount of updates on all of this. By the time we have all the facts gathered on Thursday for my live show, I'm going to do a ton of geopolitical analysis.
Yeehaw.
So you guys will be able to get a really good picture of what to expect, what we're going to see happening, what's going to actually form, and any speculation you might have, we'll actually deal with pretty effectively and pretty quickly. Okay, so there you have it. I've got all the info on it. Hopefully you've got a good foundation for what's taking place. Again, Ibrahim Raisi, the president of Iran, is confirmed dead. Even Iran is saying that's the case. And of course, we know the foreign minister, Hossein Amir Abdullahian, he's a terrorist. He is one of the highest, he is the highest ranking member of the IRGC right now, the most influential member. And he just spoke at the United Nations Security Council less than a week after they launched the largest full-scale attack in the history of the Middle East in recent days or in modern years against Israel, and they got away with it. That's the thing, I can't believe it. But let me say this, they didn't get away with it, because look what God allowed to happen today. Look what took place. They didn't get away with anything. And I will say this as kind of a closing thought. When it comes to God's chosen people, Israel, mess around and find out. Go ahead, Iran, mess around and find out. I'm sorry. And just wait until you start seeing what happens with Hamas. Wait until we start seeing what happens with Hezbollah. Wait until we start seeing what happens with the Yemeni Houthis. Wait until we start seeing what happens in Iraq. Iraq is going to change significantly as a result of this, especially as a result of the recent meeting that Iraq had with the leader of Turkey, and how that's going to dramatically affect what Kuwait does with Iran. As a matter of fact, Kuwait might back out of what they're thinking about with respect to Iran, especially as it relates to creating a pathway for what goes into what will be the new Babylon. There's a lot there. We'll talk about all of it. All right. So love you guys. God bless you. Keep fighting the good fight. Lots of info here. Hopefully that's been helpful. And again,
yes, that was very interesting, mate. Thank you. Where's the other one? There it is.
That's just perfect in the esky, chilled on a hot day down the beach, backyard cricket.
On Mysterio.
Dan Murphy's.
This is the way. Well, it's wonderful to be with you all. I'm very, very pleased. I've had an incredible experience the last 6 months working with Doug and Dean. And as you might have noticed, there's a lot of Dougs around. So I don't know what it is. It's just it's a spiritual thing, I guess. But these two guys, it's really funny. We've gotten to know each other over the last year. We co-wrote this book together, but we actually met physically, face-to-face for the first time just 2 days ago. So it's definitely, I guess, a lesson in modern technology and how all this works. So anyway, we've had a great time. It's not always been smooth. There've been a few bumps, wrestling over ideas, and it's interesting because we don't agree on everything. Certainly the rapture is an area that we don't necessarily agree on. Of course, if I told you, there's probably about 6 or 8 different views of what the rapture is, when it will be, and all that. So it's not an area that we talk about in this book. But we came together and focused on what we thought was an essential topic that evangelicals need to consider in this day. And so the topic is The Final Babylon, America's Worst Nightmare, thanks to Bob Ulrich. That's my subtitle. And Bob is my marketing director as well. And so
hey, guys, good to see you, mate.
Information to you today that for many of you it will be, oh, absolutely, this is true. This is what I've believed for some time. For others of you, this is going to stretch you because this is going to be very different than what you've heard before, and this is going to run contrary to many of the things that you've been taught by some of the great scholars and teachers and writers of our time in terms of eschatology. So we can't absolutely tell you that we're right, but we did spend an awful lot of time trying to convince you that we are. And so we hope that that this will give you just a bit of interest and pique your interest, I should say, in the subject matter. So we've talked a bit about the authors. I would just say for Mr. Krieger and Mr. McGriff, they have been working together for the last 10 years on a website they call Tribulation Network. And I think I'm prolific, but Doug Krieger is far more prolific than I. Dean likewise has written many, many articles. I think you would find their articles fascinating. Doug is in particular an expert on sacred geometry, as well as eschatology, Bible history. He has many, many, many things to talk to that are fabulous and great, mind-stretching kinds of things. Dean has also been working for many years in the area of theology, eschatology. Dean was more or less in the Foreign Service, working as a consultant to and through the State Department, served in embassies around the world, knows a great deal about economics and what the American government has been up to in reality for the last 3 or 4 decades. And so that information is vital in terms of the argument that we're making. Myself, many of you are probably familiar with me. You've seen me on Prophecy in the News. You've read some of my books. Very privileged to have this opportunity. My background is really in corporate America. I was an executive with Oracle, with Microsoft. I was a partner with Ernst & Young, which many of you recognize as today, it's the world's largest accounting firm, thanks to what happened with Arthur Andersen and Enron. Back in the old days, I was part of Arthur Young, and Arthur Andersen was the Arthur. But nevertheless, my interest is certainly in eschatology, but it's also in alternate history. It's in subjects many of you will. In fact, one person came up and said, "Oh, you're the Nazi man, aren't you?" I go, "Oh, well, I know a lot about the Nazis, but I'd like to think of myself not as a Nazi or a neo-Nazi." But nevertheless, so I get into some very strange subject matter. I just listened to Paul McGuire talk a few minutes ago, and clearly he and I have been reading the same books because there are many things that we agree on, and so I'll talk about some of those things tomorrow. All right, so today we're going to talk about what Hal Lindsey has always called sort of the prophetic scenario, his interpretation of the scriptures, the book of Daniel, Ezekiel, and Revelation, and so forth. And we're going to talk about that. I'm going to challenge that, and we'll go as to why I'm going to challenge that. We believe, my co-authors and I, that America plays a vital role in the last days. That in fact, America may be Mystery Babylon. And we're going to provide an argument to you both in terms of sort of logic, history, geopolitics, as well as scripture as to why we believe that is the case. We'll talk about the fact that although this may seem like an odd argument, I'm going to show you that many other scholars and authors have through the ages, like the last 30, 40 years, have actually said the same thing. But it just wasn't necessarily called to the audience's attention because of the dominance of Hal Lindsey and Tim LaHaye and our late brother Grant Jeffrey, who, by the way, we admire and we all owe so much to. Their work and their writing and their faithfulness to the Lord. And yet, although they're our mentors in many ways, we differ with them now. And we want to encourage you for you to think through whether or not their sort of traditional prophetic scenario is in fact the way things are played out in our day. So we'll talk a bit about the history of Mystery Babylon. We're going to identify other names that Babylon is known by in the Bible. We're going to talk about how these are all connected and really are part, very much at the center of understanding evil in the world and the power base through which Antichrist comes to power. Some of the great work that Doug Krieger has done in the Bible's the patterns of numbers and so forth. I won't call it numerology because he's not a mysticist, but he believes, as I do, that the numbers of Scripture testify to the providence of God. The fact that God in his creation and the workings of history demonstrates again and again and again that despite the evil in the world, he is in control. We're going to conclude with how America may be judged. Certainly David Brennan, Jonathan Cahn have talked about things that have occurred that amount to a judgment of America. But this is potentially the ultimate judgment, the judgment of Mystery Babylon. All right, so let me just sort of remind you what the traditional scenario is. The standard scenario put together in 1970 by Hal Lindsey. I was privileged when I was a teenager, just barely 17 years old, to see Hal come into Oklahoma City and present to a little Bible study group. He was working on, let's see, Satan is alive and well and living in the United States. No, not the United States. Living in planet Earth. Thank you. I was getting ahead of myself. So, that talks about his view was that we would see in the latter days, we would see Rome, the ancient countries of Europe that comprised the Roman Empire, that they would come together, form a union. And he was even saying as early as 1970, based on the Treaty of Paris and the Maastricht Treaty and these things, that Europe was unifying and it would lead to a common currency, a common parliament, and eventually it would lead to a power base that would overtake America, and it would become the power from which Antichrist would come to rule. So he talked about Rome, the city of 7 hills. And of course, John in the Revelation talks about Rome being on a city, or talks about a city that is on 7 hills. And ancient classical literature certainly identified Rome as a city on 7 hills. But you might be surprised to know, and I'll put this in right here because I'll forget otherwise, that there are over 70 cities in the world that claim to be a city set on 7 hills. Cities such as city where I was for quite some time, 21 years, Seattle, Washington. Some would say Washington, D.C., Jerusalem, Mecca, Moscow. So it's not just the city of Rome.
Wow, I never knew that.
And of course, some would even argue that what this is really saying is this is a worldwide system.
That makes more sense, yeah.
Continents. Mystery Babylon must be Rome. That is certainly the standard scenario's argument. The Roman Empire will be revived. And it's important, in fact, Doug shared this with me and educated me on this, that this great city, Mystery Babylon, is a city divided into 3 parts. And I never really understood what that was about. And we'll talk about that, what that means. And of course, the famous phrase that a woman rides the beast. Who is this woman? One of the core elements of the standard prophetic scenario is this view by our great brother, the late Grant Jeffrey, who said the United States is not mentioned specifically in biblical prophecy. This is in his very last book, which is One Nation Under Attack. This book was published after his death. The United States is not mentioned specifically in biblical prophecy. It does not appear by name or by geographical reference in the detailed descriptions of events that will occur during the last days generation. Christ will return, but the one nation in the West that has benefited from God's blessing is absent from the prophetic accounts of the critical last days events.
Wow, that's pretty out there.
Well, that's a view that I believe probably who in this audience has not heard that view expressed about America? Yeah. Generally speaking, that is the standard view that we've all heard, that America is not mentioned in the Bible.
Actually, I don't think that's right. It is mentioned, we just don't know. It's not mentioned by name.
It's all right. Take a very opposite view, that America is at the center of the last days. Unfortunately, not in a good way. So there's another element of the standard scenario talks about Europa, a woman that rides the beast. And if you go and do a search on Google, my wife works for Microsoft and Bing, so I would encourage you to use Bing. All right, she's following in her father's footsteps. And this is one of the classic stories of mythology. Europa was gathered up by Zeus, who turned into a great white bull and took her off and married her. And as part of the covenant exchange, the gods decided they would name a continent after Europa. And so that's how Europe came to its name, according to classical mythology. But perhaps you might not realize that, and this is kind of a foreshadowing of what we're going to talk about, that Europa was actually a Phoenician. Europa was from Tyre and Sidon, the Sidonians. And in fact, Europa was the queen of heaven. She was Astarte, Ishtar, from which, of course, we get Easter. Wherever Doc Marquis is, he would say that's right. The queen of heaven. Jeremiah talked about the queen of heaven. The children gather wood, and the fathers kindle the fire, and the women knead their dough to make cakes to the queen of heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto other gods, that they may provoke me to anger. So we know that this mythology is not just yesterday's mythology. This has been around since the very beginning. And in fact, Herodotus, who was the great historian, Greek historian that talked about Atlantis and so forth, he also went to today's land of Lebanon, which was ancient Phoenicia, Tyre and Sidon, these ancient cities. And he talked to the priest, and he tried to gather accounts of the ancient world. And in 400 BC, he wrote that this story of Europa and Zeus was already at that time 2,300 years old. He claimed that there were temples in Tyre and Sidon that dated back to 2700 BC. Now, whether or not that's true, of course, is another matter. But to say that it was an ancient myth is absolutely true. And that it may have dated pre-flood or post-flood is also true. Very close to that. And importantly, also, we want to point out that this same queen was likely derived from Semiramis. Do we remember who she is? The mother of Nimrod. Besides being the mother of Nimrod, what else was she? The wife of Nimrod. The Romans called her Sybil.
Oh,
right? So
she was Sybil.
But there are many names associated with this queen of heaven. So
Sybil was a prophet.
Who is that
prophetess
woman? This has been one of the great mysteries of theology through the entire church age. Who is this mystery, Babylon, that John wrote about? And of course, the Reformation theologians, Martin Luther, John Calvin, even 100 or so years later, a couple hundred years later, John Wesley, they all were convinced that the beast was the Pope, Mystery Babylon was the Catholic Church. Of course, you can assume that the Catholic Church felt the same way about the Protestants. But the reality at the bottom again, and the woman that thou sawest, John says, is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. That great city. Now understand, a city, city-state, they were sort of one and the same, a land, a nation. Back in the ancient times, nations were known by their cities. Phoenicia was also known by Tyre and Sidon. The Tyrians or the Sidonians. All right, so one of the things I sort of submit for your thinking is to understand that when we talk about Mystery Babylon, we're not just talking about one city. We're talking about potentially a world system. We're talking about potentially many nations. So it's much broader than a single city. But that doesn't mean that certain cities aren't at the center of this story. Talk about Mystery Babylon from this Greek word mysterion. And it has the connotation of being the hidden things, the hidden truths that initiates of the mystery religions would be taught in secret. Men, predominantly men, found worthy to be gifted with or entrusted with these secrets. That's what the mystery religions were all about. And these mystery religions they may well date back to 1000 BC, 2000 BC. I'll talk tomorrow about Mars and ask the question, was there or is there life on Mars? And we'll trace it back through the great work of the late David Flynn.
Hi, Lynn.
Talk about Mars and talk about the
Good to see ya.
But the essence here is in John's using that term. He knows that his listeners, his readers, will understand this concept of mystery religions, of initiates, of certain truths that are secret. And what he's saying is that these truths are only going to be known by the godly. So they're not going to be truths. The identity of Mystery Babylon is not going to be something that's obvious to the unbeliever. It's going to be imparted in a very unique way by the Spirit of God. So this great city of mystery, if you do it.
My tablet's been playing up and my chat's not loading properly, like it's 5 comments behind sometimes. So I'm not ignoring you, I'm just didn't know you commented, Lynn.
Search on Amazon or whatever, and you type in Mystery Babylon and you look, you're going to see book after book after book talking about Mystery Babylon, who is Mystery Babylon, and so forth. Probably one of the best books that was written in 1994 was by Dave Hunt, A Woman Rides the Beast. It was about a 600-page chronicle of the history of the Catholic Church and its fight against Protestantism and all of its apostasy. And Dave Hunt points out that much of this apostasy relates to the fact that Roman Catholicism was built to a great extent upon Babylonian or Sumerian religions. So the concept of Pontifex Maximus and so forth, the Miters, Chris Putnam, obviously a great expert on the issue of Romanism and historicism. But anyway, Dave Hunt's book, a landmark book. Now, we don't agree with Dave, and I think Dave is late too. He just passed away here just very recently. Great brother, taught us many, many great things. Now, we would not agree with him on all these things, but his book is a fabulous, fabulous book. So why do we disagree with a standard scenario? Brother Hal and the late great Jeffrey and so many others. Well, we would argue first off is that Rome has not revived, that this has been the scenario for the last 50, 60 years. Europe is still struggling, while on the one hand, it looks like that there are unity, the euro and all this. If you look closely, you see Greece falling out, Greece is falling out, Spain is on the ropes, Portugal's on the ropes, Italy's on the ropes, France is struggling. Europe is struggling to find its way, and the European currency is at risk. It may not survive. European unity may not survive. There's a schism between Northern Europe and Southern Europe. It's not clear that the Germans and the English want to carry the weight.
What do you mean, boss? Who's supposed to see? What do you mean, mate?
So there's reasons to believe that Europe will not be this great power. I'll talk more about how America continues to be truly the only global military power, so much so that there is no other power, not Russia, not China, no one that is even close to the power of America. Babylon and Iraq. This is an area of a lot of discussion. Is Babylon and Iraq going to be restored? A lot of people have conjectured that when we went into Iraq to go after Saddam Hussein, that it wasn't just for oil, but it was because of certain mysteries that were in Iraq, and that somehow this would lead eventually to the restoration of Babylon, and that Babylon would be restored. And you will see many good brothers and sisters that argue this, some at this conference, and we respect that, but we also disagree. We'll talk more about why we disagree as we go through this. We don't believe that Babylon could be restored. Again, this, I should say, one of the great premises of this whole talk is that the Lord is coming soon. And by soon, we mean in the next decade or 2 decades or 3 decades, probably 1 decade or 2 decades. And so if we are wrong about that, if the Lord tarries and he doesn't return for 50 years, 100 years or beyond, then obviously the entire geopolitical situation could change. All the chess pieces could move. But if the Lord returns really soon, as many of us in this room believe that he will, then what we're arguing is that America is at the center of this story of the arriving and the ascendancy of Antichrist. We also challenge another element of the standard scenario that says that the pre-tribulation rapture will decimate America, and that because so many Americans will be lost, Americans in high places and so forth, that America will fall out of power because of the rapture. Now, this isn't really a question about whether the pre-trib rapture is true or not. I happen to believe it's true. My co-authors don't. However, the real point is that God is able to conduct a rapture and do so without airplanes falling from the sky or cars crashing into one another. And it's also a very arrogant position to assume that our nation is so much more Christian than so many other nations of the world that only we will be decimated by the rapture. And so, as patriotic as we may wish to be, I need to draw a line between patriotism and our Christianity. The rapture may be true. It may be a pre-tribulation rapture. That does not necessarily mean that America will cease to be a world power. And if you study, as I have done in my books, and provided the research, others have as well, about the fact that America was designed from the very beginning to be the new Atlantis. We'll talk more about that. But America was planned to be this nation, freed from religion, freed from religious tyranny, freed from the Judeo-Christian worldview. The Bible, we believe, offers many hints, many truths about the nature of who Mystery Babylon is. We'll talk about that. We would argue that our patriotism has tended to blind us to the possibility that our nation could be at the center, not of the kingdom of God, but of the kingdom of Satan. So I want you to consider that as we talk. The USA continues to be the only real ally of Israel. We know from the book of Daniel, from Isaiah, that Israel will make a treaty with a land, with a people, with a great power that will promise to protect it, but then it will betray it. Right now, Israel has the so-called unbreakable alliance that Barack Obama put into place when he came into Jerusalem.
Yeah, Vast Diane said 2 million houses will lose power in Houston. I wonder if they got that back up running.
On Palm Sunday. On the 22nd of March, 322, for those of you that follow the Bonesman, with a great ice sculpture of his image to form the Unbreakable Alliance, complete with a logo developed by the Israeli government. Now, I don't know that this is the 7-year covenant with hell and death. I don't know that this is the meaning of the Daniel 70th week, but I would say it bears close scrutiny. Israel, we do not believe, will ever accept a Muslim as a Messiah. Certainly the argument of Babylon being restored, Islam being the world religion that dominates, that beheads Christians and Jews and so forth. We don't believe that Israel would ever accept a Muslim as a Messiah. So we would argue against Islam as the religion and the Antichrist as a Muslim. But there are other good brothers that have strong views that differ with that. We respect that. We would argue that America is very much a unique type of empire, commercial empire as well as a military, and that it controls the world through its commercial power. Now, the voices in the wilderness here, people like J.R. Church, the late J.R. Church, Rick Coombs, that many of you may know about, but Rick is very ill. We'd ask you to be praying for Rick. Rick, that's the upper right-hand corner, America, the Babylon, did some great work, identifies in his book almost 70 reasons why America is the Babylon of the Bible. Stanley Monteith, Dr. Stan, had the privilege of bringing he and his wife in last night from the airport. He wholeheartedly agrees. John Price, don't agree with all of his conclusions. He agrees. Patrick Heron. Patrick also is ill right now. I would ask you for your prayers. Good friend Rob Skiba, Tom Horn, and Noah Hutchings. These are all scholars, writers, researchers that have put forward the idea that America may be Mystery Babylon. In fact, it sort of began back in the 60s when it was a very unpopular time. We're talking the Vietnam War, to postulate that America was Babylon. After all, someone like an Eldridge Cleaver was talking about that. Very liberal professors were saying that. But Frank Logsdon, who was the pastor of the Moody Church, says, it is unthinkable that God, who knows the end from the beginning, would pinpoint such small nations as Libya, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Syria in the prophetic declaration and completely overlook the wealthiest and most powerful nation on the earth. Too long have we evaded the question. Too long have we summarily grouped our country with the so-called revived Roman Empire. Too long have we persisted in terming the USA in prophecy as one of the lion's cubs, a reference to England. thus giving her but an inferential mention in the shadow of a diminishing Britain. And he said this in 1967. That was definitely a scary thing to say back then. Let me give you some attributes from another phrase that's used in Jeremiah, it's used in Isaiah, it's used in Zechariah, it's used in the Psalms, and that is the daughter of Babylon, a descendant of Babylon. These are just a few, and again, Rick Coombs and others are very much, Frank Logston, Noah Hutchings, J.R. Church, all have talked about these things. These are certain attributes of the daughter of Babylon that I think are very, very specific. This daughter of Babylon is called the hindermost of nations. The word for hindermost is eschatos, which is the word from which eschatology comes, and it means sort of the last nation, the final nation before, right? And so this hindermost of nation, the youngest or the last of nations, will be this dominant nation. And of course, America, of all the nations that have come to pass in the last few hundred years, would arguably be far and away that strongest nation. Her mother shall be sore confounded and ashamed. Easy to see Great Britain in that. She is known as the hammer of the whole earth. You know, who would dare go to war with America in terms of a military confrontation on the battlefield?
Yeah, this is about 10 years old. It's not modern. It says it's 2 months ago, but this looks like footage from the 90s, actually.
But importantly, she was once a golden cup, which made them.
And back in the 90s, no one would have took on America because they were too powerful. Different situation now.
Nations drunk. That image in Jeremiah, we of course see played out once again with the harlot of Babylon and the cup of her putridity, of her sins and her immorality. She dwelleth on many waters, abundant in treasures. She's surrounded by oceans. She's divided up by great rivers. You see these themes in the scriptures. Babylon shall become heaps of rocks, a dwelling place for dragons, an astonishment and a hissing without an inhabitant. We'll talk more about that as we go. Again, I'll just mention in passing, a lot of this has been discussed by a number of authors, both Christian and not Christian, that have talked about how Washington, D.C. was designed by Masons, and it was to symbolize that the American experiment was breaking away from the religions and the political powers of Europe that were dominated by the priests of the Catholic Church, and they were dominated by kings who were empowered by the, quote, divine right of kings that they argued came from God, as God's part of his providence. And so the American founders were not necessarily Christian, as of course many of you know. Hello, are we back again? Yes, thank you. Many of them were not Christian, but they were men of faith in a deistic sort of God, but they believed that hello, as the Masons described, the great architect of the universe, and so this concept of a God was very much at the center of a Jeffersonian God, even Washington. Right, and so we know that Washington, D.C. was designed by Freemasons. Certainly we could talk more about how America fulfilled the concept of the Great Republic of Plato, the New Atlantis of Francis Bacon, Franklin's Order of the Quest. Manly P. Hall, who is perhaps the most noted historian, philosopher of Masonry, Freemasonry, would draw upon the fact, I think this is a very incisive statement here, the second paragraph, those mystical extrasensory perceptions viewed with suspicion by the materialists would then be developed according to the disciplines of the sciences, and all learning would be consecrated to the supreme end that men become as the gods, knowing good and evil. And of course, that sounds familiar as a promise made by Lucifer, doesn't it? And of course, this is in effect sort of the mission statement for the United States, according to Manly P. Hall. If we were to talk about the sort of overwhelming military empire that is the United States, it's important to notice, even as Eisenhower said, of course, the great general from World War II, beware the military-industrial complex. Many have argued that Kennedy was killed because he was trying to dampen or push or control that military-industrial complex. America spends as much on defense as all of the rest of the world combined. We have over 1,000 military bases. Think about that, 1,000 military bases in 110 countries outside of the United States. England's empire was built through colonies, as we well know. America's empire has been built through building military bases around the world. We look at the Navy, for instance. The U.S. has about 80 submarines. They're all atomic powered. Half of them are boomers, so-called, that have nuclear weapons. America's military overseas budget, this is from a couple of years ago, just under $700 billion, the total military budget, $1 trillion, well, almost a third of our budget. There is no other military in the world like ours. If we look at aircraft carriers, this is a graphic, I think, that makes a very strong point. All the aircraft carriers in the red box, those belong to the United States. All the aircraft carriers outside of that box belong to the rest of the world. So the U.S. Marines have 9 carriers. Those are smaller carriers. The Navy has 11. Europe has 6. 3 are very small. Asia has 4. Brazil has 1. The Russians have 1. The Chinese have 1. And it's a makeshift aircraft carrier from a very old model. I don't know who built it for them. But this brings to mind Revelation 13:4. And they worshiped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? How about U.S. financial dominance? Certainly, I had a great talk with Jerry Robinson, terrific writer, has done some great work, but we disagree on this point. Is America about ready to collapse? Is Wall Street ready to collapse? Is the dollar going to fall? We would argue that it's not necessarily so. And again, that's very contrarian, because most of us have been taught and have worried greatly that the dollar is ready to collapse, and that the stock market will collapse, the bond market will collapse, and so forth and so on. And we would argue that, yes, eventually that may be true, but that may not be true until late into the tribulation period. We look at what's happened with what's called the securitization food train, the credit default swaps, the collateralized debt obligations, all these things that Dean McGriff, who's our economist of sorts here in the book, talks to. It makes your head swim. But what's remarkable is that all these bankers that foisted this horrible crisis upon us, not a single one ever went to jail. And they cost how many millions of people their life savings? The academics that talk about economics are basically paid off consultants. We could go on and on, but I'm going to move forward. But there is a myth, and that is that the U.S. dominance of the world in commercial terms is waning. It is to some extent less, certainly, but the question is, compared to whom? The world still lines up to buy U.S. Treasury securities, even if it's only paying 1% interest, because at least it's preserving their principal. What is Babylon? It's a city divided in 3 parts. There's religious Babylon, there's commercial Babylon, there's military and political Babylon. I just threw that in there about all Gaul is divided into 3 parts. That's for the Latin fans here. Our definition, Babylon is any empire, from a biblical perspective, any empire that combines spiritual powers with political, military authority, financed by commercial corruption at the expense of the people. Right? If you think about that, many empires would qualify as Babylon, and that's correct. Babylon certainly at least means an archetype or symbol.
Next. Go, mate. We're booked for 18. Just wondering.
But could America be the final Babylon? Who is Babylon? The ancient Babylonian empire of Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, that we certainly recognize with Jeremiah, with Daniel, and so forth. We spend some time talking about Nimrod as the first archetype of Antichrist, the first archetype of the harlot, the Semiramis, or Shemiron, or Ishtar, the queen of heaven. Let's see, I can't read who my quote is from. Perhaps y'all can tell me. It is admitted that the secret system of Freemasonry was originally founded on the mysteries of the Egyptian Isis, the goddess mother or the wife of Osiris. But what could have led to the union of a Masonic body with these mysteries? had they not had particular reference to architecture, and had the God who was worshipped in them not been celebrated for his success in performing the arts of fortification and building. Think about this verse from Daniel. We hear this lots of times, and we hear it referenced as saying, well, the Antichrist will be a pantheist. He will believe in George Lucas's Star Wars Force. But in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, and a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold and silver and with precious stones and with pleasant things. Notice the strange-looking woman with the strange crown upon her head in the lower left-hand corner. That is Sybil. That is Semiramis. She is known as the goddess of fortresses. And while it's been lost in memory, Nimrod was known as the god of forces or fortresses or strongholds. Nimrod was the first archetype of the Antichrist. And we would argue that what Daniel is speaking of in Daniel 11 is he's referencing, also known as the Assyrian, the Antichrist, and that he would spare no expense in building the world's strongest military. That's where all the gold and the precious stones come from. So we would argue that that's a legitimate way to understand Babylon and the god of forces. Now, it wouldn't be a timely presentation here at this conference if I didn't have a snapshot of a giant. So I have a picture here from Indiana of a 9-foot giant with full copper armor that was discovered in 1925 in Welcome, Indiana. There were 8 such skeletons, 9 feet tall, in full body armor discovered. And the point that even recently, I think it was on History 2, the second channel of History, there was a television program called The Great Lakes Copper Heist. And there, a secular archaeologist, contrarian, went and looked at the copper of the Great Lakes and did chemical analysis and proved that the copper of the Great Lakes was used in the Bronze Age in Africa and in Europe over 2,500 years ago. So the Phoenicians were world travelers. It's not true that Columbus discovered America. As we'll see more in a moment, the Phoenicians were already doing a world tour. You see this little map where it shows Atlantis, Britain. This is Mark McMinon's presentation. That's actually David Flynn up in the upper corner talking about Phoenicia. But all of this comes together. In fact, that the America as a reference connection to the Phoenicians, to Tyre and Sidon, this may have been true for almost 3,000 to 4,000 years. Very different than what we would have been taught. Mystery Babylon, the history of Mystery Babylon certainly goes, as I've talked about, to the Phoenicians, Tyre and Sidon, Baalbek in Lebanon, Mount Hermon, where the angels, the watchers descended, the land of Canaan. Does some great work talking about what I nicknamed the Canaan 11, Canaan's 11 children, that the microphone cutting in and out. I don't know if I'm doing anything to cause that, so hopefully it won't be a problem. But Canaan, interestingly, the word Canaan, the land of Canaan, means merchant. And so you have the Phoenicians as the first world empire that were dealing with commerce. We talk about the Hamitic curse. It was actually the curse of Canaan, and a curse against his son, and Sidon, his son, of which Tyre and Sidon were named after. The color purple is a very interesting element of Mystery Babylon. Tyrian purple comes from mollusks that are on the beaches of Lebanon, still are. You can see the little mollusk there, the mussel with the purple sort of bleeding out of that. Well, it's a fascinating thing, and Doug pointed out to me, if you look at who was Paul's first convert in Europe, Lydia, and what was she? A seller of purple, yeah. And so we see this history. Look at the Phoenician ships, and they learned how to be great seafarers. They certainly circumnavigated Africa. They found the sort of eastern way around Africa long before Columbus. They created colonies throughout the Mediterranean. Does anyone remember Hannibal? Mm-hmm. The Punic Wars and so forth? Well, the Punics mean the purple people. And I have a little footnote where I talk about the purple people eater. as a kind of a strange play on that. Who is the Prince of Tyre? We talk about this this verse from Ezekiel. We talk about it being a sort of a hidden reflection upon Satan and Lucifer. Certainly that is true. But isn't it interesting that it's interwoven with this story of Tyre and Sidon, of the Phoenicians, of this commercial empire? I am God. You say to yourself, I am God. I sit in the seat of God in the midst of the seas. Further down, with thy wisdom and thine understanding thou hast gotten thee riches and hast gotten gold and silver into thy treasures. By thy great wisdom and by thy traffic, commercial traffic, thou hast increased thy riches, and thine heart is lifted up because of thy riches. And so you see this interplay between what is, we believe, still a traditional view of a description of Lucifer or Satan, and yet it's connected to Tyre and Sidon. This is interesting, we think. Baal, the god Baal, who Elijah battled on Mount Carmel, well, he was the god of Tyre. And you'll see some ancient statues here. This is, I don't know if L.A. Marzulli is in the room, but I wanted him to notice this very cone-head-shaped Baal statue on the far right. And just thinking to myself, could Baal have been a giant with a big head? Possibly. But it's interesting, the study that Alexander Hislop did of the Two Babylons, a fairly old book that's been around for 150 years, not without its critics. But he does a study, and I've seen it confirmed by other scholars, that talk about Melkart, which is really pronounced milk court. That's really how it's pronounced. But it's tied to Nimrod. And that really, Nimrod was, in fact, probably the human being from which Baal was derived. And isn't it interesting, Tom Horn's work talking about Nimrod, that Nimrod began to be a mighty one. Talked with Chris Putnam yesterday, and the Hebrew, which I'm not a student of Hebrew. I'm a writer. I try to do my best, but I'm not a scholar of Hebrew. But he said, you know, the Hebrew can absolutely be meant to say that Nimrod became a mighty one, began to be a mighty one. And so Herodotus tells us that this history goes back thousands of years. It stems from Lebanon, from Tyre and Sidon.
I like this channel.
And it's interesting that Hannibal, who fought so successfully against the Romans, Livy talks about the fact that Hannibal went and worshipped Nimrod, Melkart, at Cadiz, Spain. Now, what is important about Spain? Well, we know about the merchants of Tarshish. We've heard that, and certainly the standard scenario talked about. How Lindsay talks about Gog and Magog and the merchants of Tarshish and Sheba and Dedan. Well, who were the merchants of Tarshish? Well, they really were the Tyrians. They were colonies that had been developed perhaps 1,000 years after Tyre and Sidon were in their heyday. That comes from Tartessos, Spain, near or above what is known as the Pillars of Hercules, typically associated with Gibraltar, the mountains on the north of Gibraltar in the south in Africa, and the commercial empire colonized by the Phoenicians throughout the Mediterranean. And again, we see this in Isaiah chapter 23. The burden of Tyre. Howl, you ships of Tarshish, for it is laid waste, so that there is no house, no entering in from the land of Kittim, Cyprus, is revealed to them. They are to be condemned in Isaiah 23. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But notice those little symbols. The little coin is actually a Spanish real, and the two columns are representing the Pillars of Hercules. They might also represent the two columns in Freemasonry. And notice there is this caduceus wrapped around those columns. Does anyone know what that actually might symbolize? How about the dollar? It was first used by Robert Morris, who was the second most powerful man in America. This was derived from the Spanish real, a currency used in the New World by the Spanish. But the dollar was adopted as a name for currency units in America. It very likely refers to the Pillars of Hercules. When Ferdinand and Isabella became king and queen, they adopted this Pillars of Hercules as part of their seal. And there was a motto that they had, non plus ultra, which meant nothing further lies beyond the Pillars of Hercules. But guess who came along and caused them to change their motto to Plus Ultra? It's a guy named Christopher Columbus.
You had your 55th birthday party, and the neighbors didn't even notice. The good news is, you're now eligible for an IMB Bank Wisdom Saver account for over 55s. Open online in minutes. Getting older isn't all bad. IMB Bank.
For Columbus. History's fascinating, folks. I love history. To know about the truth. Now, I got to give full credit to Doug Krieger for one of his favorite words, adumbrated. Did I say it right? Adumbrated? All right, adumbrated. According to Encarta Dictionary, adumbrated means a faint outline, a vague indication, or a forewarning of what will come. It is absolutely a perfect word to describe biblical prophecy. Prophecy is adumbrated. A quote here from Robert Culver. He says, to one acquainted with the technique of the prophets, this will not appear strange, how that the careers of Antiochus Epiphanes, and Antichrist seem to intertwine, in that Antiochus's career, described in Daniel, is adumbrative of Antichrist. This also appears that the prophecy of Antichrist in Daniel 11 may be reflected back towards Antiochus. It is one of the commonest of phenomena to find events of similar nature but separated widely in time, united in one prophetic oracle. Barnes calls it the law of prophetic suggestion. Franz Delitzsch, great scholar, said that prophecy is apotelesmatic, literally meaning derived from the supernatural. What this really is saying is that prophetic language, it's not that it can't be taken literally, it can, but it also has a quality that transcends that. We remember that when Jesus took from the scroll and read about his basically proclaiming himself from Isaiah, that he was announcing to the crowd that in effect these prophecies have been fulfilled in your ears, he stopped because the rest of that verse goes on to describe the final judgment. And that wasn't time for the final judgment. But that's an example of apotelesmatic language or adumbrative language used by the scripture. We're certainly familiar with this when we talk about Daniel. Daniel's 70 weeks, the 70 weeks that are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city. We're familiar with the final week of Daniel. We typically associate that with the tribulation or the Great Tribulation. In the midst of that week, he, the Antichrist, shall cause the sacrifice, the oblation to cease, and the overspreading of abominations shall you make desolate, even unto the consummation. That determined shall be poured upon the desolate. So we're familiar with the concept of 7 and 70. We're familiar with that associated with judgment. And that is, though, in effect, apotelesmatic language. I want to share this with you. Again, this is something that Doug, to some extent, will have to give a little credit to his son, right, in analyzing this. But there is a very interesting phenomenon about 70 in judgment in biblical prophecy. We're familiar with the judgment of Judah. This was from 2 Chronicles. And I'll read this. And them that had escaped from the sword carried the Nebuchadnezzar away to Babylon, where they were servants to him and to his sons until the reign of the kingdom of Persia.
Bye, good to see you.
To fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah unto the land had enjoyed her Sabbaths for failing to honor the Sabbath year. For as long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbath to fulfill 70 years. So we're very familiar with the concept of 70 years that those from Judah were taken away, carried away by Nebuchadnezzar to Babylon, and then a remnant returned with Zerubbabel back to begin to build the temple, which took quite a while to do.
Still glaring.
Are you aware that the judgment of Tyre and the judgment of Babylon also involves 70 years of prophecy? And yet it's not 70 literal years, it's 70 years in apotelesmatic language. Reading the judgment of Babylon from Jeremiah 25. This whole land shall be a desolation and an astonishment, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. That's the Hebrews. And it shall come to pass when 70 years are accomplished that I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation with the Lord for their iniquity, saith the Lord, for their iniquity, and the land of the Chaldeans, not just the city, and will make it a perpetual desolation, which of course Jeremiah chapters 50 and 51 talks about further. The judgment of Tyre from Isaiah 23. Now it shall come to pass in that day that Tyre will be forgotten 70 years, according to the days of one king. And it shall be at the end of 70 years that the Lord will deal with Tyre. She will return to her hire and commit fornication. Sound familiar? With all the kingdoms of the world on the face of the earth. Who is Isaiah talking about with Tyre? He's talking about Babylon. So Tyre and Babylon are connected. Another element, Jehu, the king that was called to slay Ahab and his children. It's fascinating that, well, I'll go ahead and read this passage because it's really an incredible passage. And he that was over the house and he that was over the city, the elders also, and the bringers of the children sent to Jehu, saying, We are thy servants, and will do all that thou shalt bid us. We will not make any king, we will be loyal to you, in other words. Do thou that which is good in thine eyes. Then he wrote a letter, this was Jehu, writing to the sort of the leaders of the cities of northern Israel. He wrote a letter the second time to them, saying, If ye be mine, if ye be loyal, and if ye will hearken unto my voice, take ye the heads of the men, your master's son, Ahab's sons, and come to me to Jezreel by tomorrow this time. Now the king's sons numbered 70 persons. They were basically being brought up by
Okay, Phil, good night, mate.
So it came to pass that basically they
If I'm up late enough, I'll join your chat again, mate.
decapitated the 70 sons of Ahab, and they sent them, and Jehu had them set up as two heaps, as two pillars, before the gates of Jezreel. Isn't it interesting that the valley of Jezreel is beneath the Mount of Megiddo? Could it be that there's some relationship here between the 70 sons, the judgment, and so forth in Armageddon? It's just an interesting story, don't know. But 70 seems to connect the dots. Tyre and Sidon, Tarshish, Mystery Babylon. Isaiah in chapter 24 says, It shall come to pass in that day that the Lord will punish on high the host of exalted ones, and on the earth the kings of the earth. It's talking about the end of days. They will be gathered together as prisoners are gathered in the pit and will be shut up in the prison. They will think they will be coming to fight the Lord because of what they will, but it will actually be because of what God wills. After many days they will be punished, and the moon will be disgraced and the sun ashamed. The moon shall be as blood, the sun will be darkened. For the Lord of hosts will reign on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem and before his elders gloriously. That is, the glory of God outshines the lights, ruling humankind, thus shaming them. That is Isaiah chapter 24. Then if you go back and you read the burden of Babylon of Isaiah 13, you would think that, well, this is talking about the Babylon of Nebuchadnezzar or Belshazzar. It clearly is not. The burden of Babylon, which Isaiah the son, I have commanded my sanctified ones, I have also called my mighty ones for mine anger, even them that rejoice in my highness. Who do you think Isaiah in chapter 13 may be referring to here? Who are the mighty ones? Who are the mighty ones that come with the Messiah riding on white horses to judge the world system, the evil world system? You all, glorified Christians that will be transformed into mighty ones that rejoice in the name of the Lord. That is, in effect, sort of a secret reference in Isaiah to what is talked about, of course, in Revelation by Paul and by Jesus. Babylon will fall, but when? The standard scenario suggests that Babylon will fall prior to the tribulation period, that Europe will ascend to power. A Europe, by the way, which can't even fight poor little Libya without America leading from behind. Right? So Babylon will fall, but will it be before the tribulation period, or will it be midway through? Will it be at the end? Recall, America has great survivability. Its aircraft carriers are dispersed throughout the world. Its submarines are dispersed throughout the world. It's not easy to take America, to take its military out. Then you think about this commercial power, but yet Babylon will fall. Babylon is fallen, and the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, For no man buyeth their merchandise any more, for in 1 hour so great riches is come to naught. How will America fall? Don't know exactly, but isn't it interesting that Isaiah repeatedly says, the word that the Lord spake against Babylon and against the land of the Chaldeans, not just the city, but the whole land, by Jeremiah the prophet. For out of the north there cometh up a nation against her, which shall make her land desolate, and none shall dwell therein. They shall remove, they shall depart, both man and beast. For lo, I will raise and cause to come up against Babylon an assembly of great nations from the north country, and they shall set themselves in array against her. From thence she shall be taken. Their arrows shall be as a mighty expert man. None shall return in vain. Behold, the people shall come from the north, and a great nation, and many kings shall be raised up from the coasts of the earth, all coming together against mighty Babylon. So what is the fate of America? If America be Babylon, the final Babylon, Jeremiah says, because of the wrath of the Lord it shall not be inhabited, but it shall be wholly desolate. Every one that goeth by Babylon shall be astonished and hiss at her plagues. How is the hammer of the whole earth cut asunder and broken? How is Babylon become a desolation among the nations? Therefore the wild beasts of the desert, the wild beasts of the islands shall dwell there, and the owls shall dwell therein, and it shall be no more inhabited forever. Neither shall it be dwelt in from generation to generation. As God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah, perhaps by fire and brimstone, perhaps by some type of nuclear weapon or nuclear judgment, we don't know, and the neighbor cities thereof, saith the Lord, so shall no man abide there, neither shall any son of man dwell therein. It's not a happy thought, but it's from the prophet Jeremiah referring to the daughter of Babylon. So, to wind up, the real question is this nation going to return to God? Certainly, great brothers here, Tim LaHaye, Grant Jeffrey, Mark Hitchcock, Joel Rosenberg, talk about the need for repentance in America, the need to return to God. But the question that we really have to ask ourselves and think about, is it too late? Is it too late for America to return? Is the die cast? Is the plan set in motion? Is America the final Babylon? Will Antichrist come to power because of America? Now understand, I'm not saying that America by itself is Babylon. Remember, the beast works in conjunction with kings, the kings of the whole earth. Psalm 2, and used so many times in Scripture. But America may be in a leadership role that is combining the efforts of all these nations that stand opposed to the kingdom of God. So that's the question for you to consider. So, myself, this is Douglas Krieger and Dean McGriffs. This is their contact information. I promised Bob that we'd be done by 4 o'clock. We have 10 minutes, Bob. Can we do some Q&A? Doing good. Amen. So I might have my my co-authors join me here on the stage, and because if you ask questions I can't answer, I want them to be here. And in case I've gotten anything wrong and you point that out, I want them to take the blame. And so this is Dean, and that's Doug Krieger. And so if you have questions of economic interest, certainly this is a guy that you can visit with, because he's had so much experience in American foreign policy and working through the government, many times at odds with members of the CIA that were working with him in embassies around the world. And so certainly you might find interesting to visit with him. Doug Krieger is knowledgeable in so many areas, but we have time for a couple, 3 questions. Does anyone, yes, stand up if you would and speak very loudly, and I'll try to repeat your question also. Federal Reserve Act is ending December 23rd. What do we think that will lead to? All right, I don't know if we can get, do we have the microphone? Great, super. Go ahead. What do you think, Dean? Yeah.
Well, I personally doubt that there's going to be a change. It just doesn't seem like it will. I think it will just continue as it is.
Okay, so no change basically is what we're saying. Yes. Well, it's certainly a matter of speculation. I'm not sure if any of us are prepared to say who it is, but just that it's consistently described in Scripture. And it's also not just that northern country, but that northern country leads many nations from the coastlands, which is a biblical euphemism from sort of all over the world. So if you all haven't noticed, in fact, we would say that our title, The Final Babylon, may not be very popular amongst evangelicals, but amongst other nations of the world, they will not disagree with that statement. Okay? Another question? So I won't answer your question. Yes, over here. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the question has to do with how much money was spent to create an embassy in Babylon or in Baghdad? In Baghdad, and as a result of that, do we think that isn't it logical that Babylon might be restored and become basically the city, the capital of the Antichrist? What do you think, Doug?
Well, it's closer to $1 billion actually, and it's as large as the Vatican, if you're familiar with Vatican City. Fascinating, isn't it, that the 82nd Airborne shows up at the ancient site of the actual Babylon, and that it is the United States of America that is building or has built the largest embassy ever built on the face of the planet. Notice who's there. Okay, just notice who's there. See, our problem is we have an 800-pound gorilla on the bed. Smells, stinks, makes noise, rattles and everything, but we're in total denial. And that is not, an extraordinary position to take, as we've said. But it was we who went in there. So the question being, who's in control? Who's in control? He that has the purse is in control. And right now, we're in control. We may be leading from behind, but we are in control. It may look like we're fooling around in Syria right now and in Egypt as the oracle of Damascus and as the oracle of Egypt is unfolding right in front of us. But smashed between Isaiah 17 and 19 is a very peculiar chapter called chapter 18. You should read that one. It's in control.
Thank you. Let's take another question. Yes, over here. Yes. Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. Let me see if I can summarize that question for the folks out in the audience. The issue is the dollar basically, is it failing? Is it losing its power? And is it, as a result of that, something that would cause America to no longer be able to project power in the world? Dean, what do you think?
America's power is still based upon an extremely wealthy nation. We're still the #1 economy in the world. I was joking with Jerry, who has a booth next to us. I said, you have this book, and I wrote something just like that a few years ago. And then I realized that either one or the other is true. You can't have it both ways. And I buy into the idea that this is the final Babylon, and it will go to the end, and therefore the dollar can't go down. When there are auctions for our debt to buy our bonds, there are 3 times as many buyers as there are bonds. There's almost something supernatural about the dollar that the nations of the world love. They want it. They want the greenback. They want to come here. They want to experience this. So I don't. That's one of the main reasons I don't see it coming down. Will the financial system eventually crumble from its own weight of debt? Yeah, it sure will. And that'll give them a good reason to develop something new and better that requires marks and things like that.
Great. All right. Next, one more question. Yes, way over here on the right. Which chapter, Revelation? Okay. 1 minute answer, sir.
Okay, 1 minute answer. Okay. By the way, do you know where it says hallelujah in the New Testament? Anybody? It was when Babylon goes up in smoke. No, really. You cannot find another hallelujah in the whole New Testament until Babylon goes up in smoke. So the next time you want to yell out a hallelujah, just remember Babylon is up in smoke. It's true. You read it again very carefully. It is really something. Now, in Revelation 18:4, it says, "Come out of her, my people." We are looking at a judgment from Revelation 16 that it says that Babylon collapses in 3 parts. 3 parts. She's judged. Fascinating. Revelation 17, and this is good old dispensationalism here. Revelation 17 is apostate Babylon, the woman. The beast turns on the woman. Okay? Remember, she may be riding the beast, but the beast turns on her after he's used her. Okay? In Revelation 18, read it carefully, is commercial Babylon. Commercial Babylon is judged in Revelation 18. The false prophet, notice this, and the beast do not meet their end until Revelation 19. That's the military and political Babylon. So this goes all the way to the end. But the tripartite nature of Babylon is there today, very real today. And is it a city?
Yeah, city versus land.
Is it a city versus land? Okay. Actually, when you're talking about Damascus, we're talking about a city, but we're also talking about a nation state. When you're talking about Babylon, in a very real sense, you're talking about a city, and you're also talking about a state. Okay? Yes, I would have to say there is one dominating commercial city in the world.
New York.
Altogether dominating, and I got news. It isn't Frankfurt.
It's New York.
It isn't Hong Kong, and it isn't Singapore, and so forth, right? I think you know what I'm talking about. So here is where we are today. What shall we do if this scenario is really the case? If this is the final Babylon, what is our position? I encourage you to read the book, and I encourage you to speak out. Paul McGuire just shared in the other room, and his last statement was, maybe we could turn this around at this point. God is a God of great mercy and long suffering. But how far we've gone down the road that this golden cup, and gold is always a picture of the transforming power of God, but it is full of what? Putridities. We're exporting more junk and just, it's putrid. And at a certain point, as it says in Scripture, my spirit will not always strive with men. Time's up, Noah, and he gave him 100 years. Okay? Time was up. We are at that point today as it was in the days of Noah. So shall it also be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. And that's it.
Okay. This will take us up to 3 hours, guys, so I haven't watched this at all.
This is the way.
What's this channel? Prophecy Watch.
So I really see what's going to happen there is there's going to be some person who's just born as a man. He grows up. I believe he's going to be part of the secret societies. He's going to have tremendous influence and power and access to all kinds of high-tech stuff. And among that will be the process known as recombinant DNA. And with recombinant DNA, you can actually open up a gene or a DNA strand, and you can insert a foreign gene into that. So I think what's going to happen is he's going to take Satan's DNA, Satan's genetic code, and he's going to insert it into his own body. And then he's going to become a chimera. He's going to become the beast by actually going through this transformation. The crazy thing is that we have the technology. We know that the sons of God came and did this back in the days of Noah.
And we know that America went into Iraq to retrieve Nimrod's body from the museum. We know that's a fact.
So we have a biblical precedence for this. And I think we're seeing these kinds of things happening already today.
Why is it all glary? Oh, it's not. It's them. I didn't know there was so much reading, guys. Hang on, I'll try and get the camera right. There's a cat. What is this? We had someone talking? Oh, good, yes.
What the passage portrays, and it's very difficult for many people to absorb this, it portrays fallen angels. These are not the good guys. Remember when Satan fell, a third of the angels fell with him. Not all of them, but a group of them, apparently, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, chose to try to create a hybrid race by cohabiting. But I don't know the technology. I'm not going to get into that. But they apparently see, angels can't multiply. Angels are eternal. Reproduction is a process for mortals. But at the same time, Satan's got a problem. A third of the angels fell with him, so he's got a deficiency of 2 to 1 in any war that comes on. Right? He's got to find a way to strengthen himself. This is just conjecture that floats around. Now, the offspring of Nephilim, they're also called the Hagibarim, the mighty ones. And now, where the confusion starts to set in is when this Hebrew passage was translated into the Greek in the Septuagint, the word they used for the Nephilim was gigantes. It sounds like giants.
And it turns out they were giants, but that's not what the word means. Gigantus comes from gigas, which means earthborn. So in the Hebrew, they're called the fallen ones. In the Greek, they're called the earthborn. The purpose of the flood was not just that there was sin in the land. There was, and it's emphasized. But if sin brings the flood, we better get some life jackets. No, there's something far deeper going on. That's what I want to sensitize you for when you do your own study and come to your own conclusions. But I want you to recognize there's something much more profound that God, that's a problem that God was solving, and that is that Satan's strategy was to contaminate the human race.
You need to understand that there are these divine beings out there that were part of the heavenly council that are extremely powerful, and that some of these beings have fallen. Because what that psalm is talking about, if you read the whole Psalm 82, is that they are oppressing the poor. They are not judging rightly among the poor. Yahweh gave these celestial beings authority over certain parts of humanity, and they were abusing their people. They were allowing the poor to be victimized. And so he's saying unto them that, even though thou art gods, you will fall like the princes and die like men. And again, the wages of sin is what? Death. So even these beings can die.
Are there UFOs and ETs in the Bible? Interesting question. We got to define our term a little bit, I think, right? So, in as far as there were sons of God coming down, there were demons coming down, and yes, there are aliens, because the demons of yesterday are today's aliens. That's really the bottom line. There are not aliens from some distant galaxy or from the Pleiades system or anything like that. They are very much from here. They're demonic. And so, in as far as there were demons, then yes. But, we can't call them demons or gods from yesteryear because that's really out of fashion. But you can call them aliens because now they're from some other place and they evolved. It's interesting how evolution has served as such a foundation for this. The demons, Satan gets us thinking that there is no God, that there is no Satan nor any demons. But then he starts replacing it with these other entities. And we believe in evolution, lots of people do. And so that serves as the foundation for these otherworldly beings that have also evolved, not by God, mind you, but they've evolved from a long time ago. And as far as UFOs, well, UFO is an unidentified flying object. And we're seeing those today. People are seeing those all over the place. And generally what they look like is just some kind of a white light. It's a white ball of light or something like this that's floating around in the sky. And people will say, oh, it's a kite. Now we can all see what a kite looks like. They're not helicopters. We know what helicopters look like. We're not stupid. Right? Neither are the people that take all these videos. And you can watch them on YouTube, and there's just thousands of them. And, I'm sure there's a few pranksters out there. Right. But sure, but still, just the quantity and even the quality of the video is such that you're like, wow, that's really amazing. So in the Old Testament, you find places where the heavens were opened. For example, in 2 Kings chapter 6, Elijah and his servant are surrounded by the Syrians. They wake up one morning, and the servant goes outside, and he sees all these guys. He's like, oh boy. He goes back and says, Master, we're done. And Elijah, he's just very calm. He prays, oh Lord, I pray you open his eyes. And so God opens the young man's eyes, and he looks all around him and sees these horses and chariots of fire. Now that's interesting. Why would God need to use chariots of fire? Well, I don't know the answer. I mean, you think you could just go, kind of Star Trek kind of thing. You go from here to there. But for some reason, in that other dimension, you have horses of fire, you have these chariots of fire, and these things are going around. And in some way, I would suspect that the demons are kind of doing the same thing. I don't know if they're on horses of fire necessarily, but when they materialize, they look at these fiery white orbs, and however they're transporting themselves, I don't know. But it's not like they can just think it and they're there, but they have to somehow travel and to traverse through whatever medium, the spiritual medium or through the physical medium. They're actually moving about. So again, I wouldn't say that we have what we call technical UFOs back then, but you did have these horses and chariots of fire in that angelic spiritual realm. There's movement going on. Angels have wings. Again, why do they have wings? Right? Is there air in there? These are questions we just don't know. Right? We still don't know the answer to these things. But still, there's a function for these things. If they have wings, then they must need them. If there are horses and chariots of fire, then they must need those in some capacity that I don't understand. And we're not really told. But still, there it is. So what we're seeing today is a resurgence. And we're not so much a resurgence, we're seeing a breakthrough of that realm into our own. And those demons are coming through. Somehow they're being able to manifest in this realm. I don't know how they do that, but they're doing it. They're manifesting, and they're up in the skies. Millions of people have seen these things. Right. You even have sort of more famous people like Ronald Reagan. He claimed to have seen something a number of times. Jimmy Carter, Barry Goldwater, Douglas MacArthur. Just to name a few of the presidents. You have other world leaders. You have Michio Kaku, who's a real famous physicist.
Let me make a prediction, and that is sometime by mid-century, we might make contact with an intelligent civilization in outer space.
Plus, you have just lots and lots of astronauts. They say that every time that we had a mission, we were being followed by something. We were being watched. We saw some craft. We saw something. Right? And you can watch some of these videos that have been released by NASA, and you can see these things out there. Right? So there's definitely something out there. The question is, what is it?
I can't even read that, so I doubt you guys can. Oh man. I'll try and get it clearer. Come on, camera, tune in. It's the best I can get it.
What seems to be the case is they come from some other domain, some place, maybe not another star or maybe from another dimension, but they manifest, they show up here in our physical world. People have a number of cases where people are just plain gone. A child comes into the mother's room. Mom, you weren't there during the night when I came. There is burned earth outside where the ships have landed. There is physical. It may not satisfy our criteria of proof, but proof may be something which only operates within the frame of evidence of this physical world in the box you mentioned before that we live in. This is what's going on here is something in some ways more subtle. In other words, something coming from another dimension into our world, which is very commonly experienced in other cultures, but not in this culture.
John Mack, who recently passed away, but he was at Harvard, and according to his own testimony, he says that I was not a believer in this thing. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He just kept hearing about these things, and so he came to this conclusion that these were real physical abductions. Very, very slowly he came to that conclusion, and rather skeptically. He didn't want to come to that conclusion, but eventually the data was so much that he could not overcome it. And he had to just say, well, it's happening. Something physical is happening. Dr. David Jacobs has done similar research. He was quite upbeat about this whole thing for a long time. But in the last several years, he's become very downcast about his discoveries, because he's discovering that these beings that are taking people are smarter than us, they're stronger than us, and they have a hybridization program for them. That they're creating a hybrid race to take over, and he says at best we're going to be second-class serfs. So he's very discouraged, and I can see why. I think if you discover these things, and yet you don't understand that there's a greater power, which is Jesus Christ, who has a much better plan, then I would be extremely depressed. I mean, in a way, I'm sort of upbeat about the whole thing, because I see we are getting very close to the end. But it's also kind of scary. I mean, there's crazy things going on.
I think the New Age, as well as the mainstream sort of media, and I mean like movies and television shows, and everybody's been shoving this alien UFO thing down our throats because it has so many uses for the Antichrist system. I've said many times, I don't know if this is the way that it will all be set up. It is just a really convenient way if it does go down like this, because it does do three main things that are needed for the Antichrist system. Number one, it causes the world to reject God. We've been sold this erroneous idea that if aliens exist, then God doesn't. So the headlines the day after would read, God proven wrong or whatever. The whole world would be united in its rejection of God overnight. So that certainly would play in, obviously, to the biblical account of this world order at the end of time. Also, we would believe ourselves to be God. This one would take a little bit longer to sink in, but the idea that aliens, in a real sort of evolution kind of way, just evolved, and that that it could be sold to us that they were somehow our creators, in the sense that they genetically modified us, or they might have some excuse to the origin of life or something to that effect. Ultimately, we would see them as gods in the sense of their perhaps abilities or their technological advancement. And it really depends on this point of how and what they say about us, if they say anything, or if in the discovering of them that it is implied in some way that we ourselves could be like them and therefore like gods. And that really goes into the third part, which is the evolution. I think that this concept of evolution is crucial to so much of what the Antichrist system does, especially the genocide based on belief system that happens in the end time scenario. Really requires, as it did in the Third Reich, an idea of evolution. There's a concept that there's certain people that are not fit for the new system, the new evolution. They were sort of helping humanity evolve by the elimination of those that weren't ready for the new age, the new world. Hitler believed in the fifth root race of Blavatsky, but yet I think this new system is going to have a very unique version of evolution. And of course, the appearance of aliens really validates that on a worldwide scale. No longer do you have to, have this sort of underground preaching of theosophy as it was in Hitler's time, but rather the whole world is united in this understanding or perceived understanding of potential evolution coming. After all, the aliens are here. We can be like them. They just simply evolved like we have the potential to do. We can become like them. We can communicate telepathically or whatever, as long as we are willing to take that next step. And there's this great precipice that we're, now at this ability to move to this next level, but it's all going to be in the context of, God has just recently been disproven, but yet there'll be people on Earth that can't quite go with new system because they're stuck in the old paradigm of God does exist and the Bible was accurate and these aliens are a deception. Those people will be presented as enemy number one and will be viewed as the thing that's holding us back from the potential evolution.
The transhumanist movement, it really is a cover. It's a cover for the far more sinister event that's coming. And I think on one hand, it provides the technology to make some of these things happen. But it's also man saying, look, we can do it. We can truly pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps.
Look how bad that screen is.
We don't have to wait. Because again, if it's predicated on we've evolved this far, why shouldn't we continue evolving? And if we have the technology to overcome death, to overcome disease, why wouldn't we, right? And that sounds right. If there's a little baby that's dying of some awful disease, and we have the power to go in and actually rearrange the DNA and the genes and make things right, wouldn't we be barbaric not to do that? See? So this becomes sort of the heartthrob that we went, oh, we better do this, right? And, I think there probably are some decent things that could be done. Like anything, any kind of technology, there's always room for good. But I really think that we're getting into an area that we should not play with. Because we're not rearranging the Legos that God created. And he's like, don't rearrange those. We're going into the source code. That's what we are. And think about DNA. What is it? It's source code, right? God made the source code. Through sin, the source code got kind of scrambled and mixed up a bit. Through the incarnation, cross, and the resurrection, God has promised to restore our source code to how it ought to be, and probably even upgrade us a bit.
Do you think that there was something genetically changed with mankind in the fall?
Yeah, I do actually. Okay. It's fascinating that you asked that because even evolutionists have pointed that there was some record of an event in the life of the original man. The record of the event actually did affect something. The event was the fall, okay? And the fall, and at the fall of man is when all of creation became corrupt as well. Because everything came out of the earth or from man, right? So Eve, of course, came out of man. Man came out of the dirt itself, out of the dust. And there's this connection. In Hebrew, you see the word Adamah is talking about the soil or the land, and Adam who comes out of that. So it's kind of like God takes all this dirt, he puts it together, he blows his spirit into man. And whatever happens to man, the condition of man will be the condition of the earth. So if man is good, the earth is good. If man is decayed and corrupted, the earth becomes corrupted. And Romans chapter 8 speaks about that the creation itself is groaning, right? Just eagerly waiting with this earnest expectation of the revelation of the sons of God. When Jesus came, he had the X chromosomes given to him by his mother, but his father, genetically speaking, was the Holy Spirit, right? So the Holy Spirit provided X's and a Y chromosome, because the Y is passed from father to son. What women do not have the Y chromosome. So he did not have Adam's Y chromosome. So he got a new Y chromosome. And so Jesus becomes the second Adam. Right? Adam was the first, Jesus was the second Adam. And now to be part of God's kingdom, you have to be reborn. You have to have a new birth, become a new creation. We're going to be part of that second Adam. We're all born naturally as sons of the first Adam, but we have to be born again as sons of the second Adam. So, and I really think that all this is going to ultimately.
Okay, guys, this is over in half a minute, so I'll see you tomorrow, guys. It's hard to find something good to stream, guys. There's not much content up there. I do my best to find something unusual and deep on these streams, but the content's not out there now. If you know any content, post it to me, please. Okay, guys, God bless.
Be realized in a new DNA package for us.